the advancing troops of the front, pursuing the enemy, with battles came to the Molochnaya River and encountered stubborn resistance there. Pre-prepared positions here were occupied not only by retreating Hitlerite troops, but also by the transferred forces from the Crimea. The defence could not break through from the start. There was a pause necessary for concentration of our troops and reconnaissance of enemy positions. The fascist command was well aware of the threat of breaking through the defence at Molochnaya. It would be a disaster for the Crimean grouping. Not having sufficient forces to disrupt the upcoming offensive of our front, it strengthened its air group, planning to make powerful strikes on the troops of the front. To counter enemy aviation, our division was relocated to the area of Bolshoi Tokmak. The regiment flew to the village Rozovka. The battle days began, heavy air battles with large groups of the enemy. On the second day of basing at the new place, it was necessary to rescue from bombing the regiment of Ilov at the airfield in Chernigovka. Arrived from the rear attack aircraft, apparently had no idea about the war. They arranged the planes in a line and did not camouflage. The enemy scout immediately spotted them, and the next day early in the morning a group of bombers raided here. At that time, having done my morning exercise at the regiment's CP, I was standing shirtless, and the Chief of Staff was pouring me cold water from a kettle. And suddenly I saw a group of 9 Fokkers, and behind it 9 U-88s. "Germans!" I shouted. "Danish, pick up the planes." I rushed to my Cobra and took off as I was, naked from the waist down, without wearing a parachute. A few more airplanes followed me into the sky. At Chernigovka we overtook the Junkers, vigorously attacked them, and disrupted the targeted bombing on the parking lot of Isle. During the pursuit, a Messerschmitt passed in front of me. His attack was unsuccessful, he missed. And then I remembered that I was not wearing a parachute. I even felt hot, although I was shirtless and wet. I scolded myself for my hotness, and soon our small group left the battle. We were not particularly successful in this unorganized fight, but the main thing we did, the attacking aircraft were not struck. In Rozovka, temporarily serving as regimental commander, in a difficult air situation I sent to combat missions 8 to 10 aircraft in a group. They successfully repelled raids by large enemy forces and almost no losses. True, this method required frequent sorties. Groups were commanded, as a rule, by pilots who arrived to replenish the regiment in the Kuban. Many of them showed good organizational skills. Among them stood out A. Klubov. Decisive, courageous, he intelligently built the battle, and his group always succeeded. So it happened, and in one of the sorties. At the approach of his 8 to Molochnaya, pilots heard the command Tiger. "A group of bombers is coming to Big Tokmak. Hurry up and attack." "Understood." "Execute," reported the leader and ordered close together. The fighters bravely went into a frontal attack in tightly closed links. Here struck at the 3 going 9s the first link, and 3 bombers burning went to the ground. Attacks the second link. 2 more U-88s smoked in the air. Then the 8, vigorously turned around, rushed to the bombers from the rear hemisphere. Klubov's group was soon replaced by Lukyanov's approaching 8. Fighters quickly and boldly pounced on the approaching 9 bombers and covering them Messerschmitts. In this battle were destroyed 8 Junkers, not counting the damaged. Klubov shot down 3 planes, Zhardev 2, Sukhov, Eremin and Lukyanov 1 each. Chistov and Ivashko shot down 2 planes. Combat sorties in large groups justified themselves. Underestimation of such a method, dispersal of forces and resources led to less success in battles, unjustified deaths of even experienced pilots. This is exactly what happened in our neighbour, in the 104th Regiment. The commander of this unit, a hero of the battles in the Kuban, Vladimir Semenishin, led an unequal battle with a small group. The enemy had a significant superiority. The regiment commander shot down 3 airplanes. But he was also shot down and seriously wounded. Semenishin found the strength to leave the plane, but he couldn't open his parachute and crashed. It was a great loss. It bitterly echoed in our hearts. We knew this brave pilot well. We had fought in the same sky many times. After a 2-week absence, returned to the regiment Zayev. Unfortunately, recently he was often delayed on some business. Immediately to us flew Division Commander in Dzusov, dissatisfied with the fact that the regiment commander was solving some personal affairs outside the unit. He spoke sharply with him. Then reproachfully said to me, "Where are the groups of your regiment? They are neither seen nor heard above the front line. Groups of other regiments are patrolling in sight of the troops. But we can't see yours. Comrade Division Commander, if we keep buzzing over you like bumblebees, we won't accomplish our task. Well, we'll shoot down a few Junkers, but the bombs will still fly on the troops. It is necessary to intercept the enemy on the approach and there, to disrupt the upcoming bombing. Such preemptive strikes produce a strong impact on the mental state of enemy pilots." Division Commander apparently was irritated by the conversation with Zayev and did not delve into my arguments, although I knew him as a thoughtful chief, able to draw the right conclusions from the experience of battles. "Stop convincing me with your theories. Patrol as you should, so that I don't have to listen to complaints from the command," he threw in his heart. Despite this conversation with Dzusov, I remained in my opinion about the tactics of intercepting bombers. After the departure of the commander, Zayev, with a resentful look, handed me a certificate of treatment. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, you should have reported to the division commander, but it was possible to call the unit to warn about the delay." I asked Zayev for permission to fly out in the morning to free hunting in the rear of the enemy. The answer was shocking. "You can fly in pairs. All hunters fly in pairs, and there is no exception for you. Now the situation in the air is very difficult, and it is inexpedient to fly in pairs. If you want to fly, then fly in pairs," I heard a categorical answer. I did not argue. G. Golubev and I gained altitude and, approaching south of Melitopol to Molochnaya, requested an advanced control. "Tiger, I am 100. Report the air situation." "A group of bombers is approaching Bolshoi Tokmak from the north. Attack." "Tiger, I'm 100. We're going on a hunt in pairs. I made it clear that we don't have enough forces. Stop hunting. Attack the bombers. The order of senior commanders is the law. I realize that the tense situation may require such actions. Turn to the north," and we descended at a high speed and passed Big Tokmak. Below, 18 U-87s stretched out in a chain before bombing. With a slight downgrade, I attack the front one. I'm giving a line to the preempted point, a small jumper line on another, then on the third, skipping over the bombers, making a slide. With a Falcon strike, I destroy the rear U-87. Immediately on the right, and left in front of the nose of my plane, flew traces of powerful fire. From both sides piled up 2 pairs of Messerschmitts. Immediately I assess the situation. I realize that it is impossible to attack bombers further, inevitable death. Sharp slide out of the pincers Messerschmitts. My wingman G. Golubev is fighting with the 3rd pair of enemy fighters. I rush to his aid, a pair of diving out of the fight, and then the whole 6 enemy fighters leave after the bombers to the west. The dive bombing is thwarted. Too bad it's just the 2 of us. The 4 of us would have done a great job now. After landing, as soon as I stepped on the ground, I saw engineer Zheshmud surrounded by pilots and technicians. I approached him. It was clear from his look that the trip to Nogaisk ended with a heavy mental trauma for him. "How was your trip? What happened?" "It's not easy, Comrade Major, to talk. The whole family was shot by the fascists back in 1941. All of them old men, wife and children." And he sobbed. I and everyone around me felt a tightness in my throat, and tears came to my eyes. "Pull yourself together, Yasha. Tears won't help. We'll avenge them mercilessly. I've shot down a bomber now, and apparently not just one. Next time I swear to shoot down more for the death of your relatives. Be strong. You're a man and a warrior." We had already heard and witnessed Hitler's atrocities many times. A ball of burning hatred was accumulating in my soul. It was constantly swirling, did not let me calm down, forced to search for the enemy, to smash him. Unsatisfied with the battle, I decided in the second flight to cover the troops to fly 8. According to my calculation, in the middle of the day should be a raid of bombers from the direction of Krivoy Rog. But my plans broke down. Zayev ordered the Link Klubova to fly with another group. Despite objections, the regiment commander approved my group as part of the Link. There's nothing to do. Platoon, it's still not a pair, and you can fight successfully, showing skill. Going to the rear of the enemy's defence between Nikopol and Bolshoi Tokmak, we were searching at speed, pendulum manoeuvre. The estimated time had passed, fuel was running out, and there was no enemy. It was time to go home. However, my calculations were justified, although with some delay. Being above Nikopol, in the direction of Big Tokmak, above us I noticed a group of airplanes. Assuming that the U-88s are going to bomb a cluster of cavalry east of the city, I decided to let them pass to Bolshoi Tokmak and there to hit the enemy. Having warned the pilots of the Link and Tiger about the enemy, I immediately transferred the group to climbing altitude. Of course, I was guided not only by the desire to fight in front of my superiors, who were dissatisfied with our tactics, but I also wanted the downed planes to be confirmed by Dizusov on the Tiger. But the main thing, the enemy will be distracted from their task. You can take a favourable position and strike unexpectedly. I turned the Link and, gaining altitude, went forward, as if luring the enemy to our side. Although it is quite possible, the enemy did not see us. A few minutes passed. It's time. A sharp turn to the enemy, and tightly interlocking the Link with a decrease in the attack. Suddenly I saw a yellowish colour on the wings. It immediately alerted on our bombers, faded red stars give yellow colour. There was no time to think about it, it was a matter of seconds. "Don't shoot," I shouted, and after a second I clearly saw the yellow outlines of crosses on the wings. Anger for the failure of the attack seized me. Abruptly through the back I turn in the opposite direction. I enter the line of bombers. In the sight of the leading. Q, and in front of me there is a huge circle of fire. The torn wing of an exploded U-88 hits a nearby bomber and whizzes past me with a slowly rotating engine propeller. For a moment, without having time to react with the rudders, I penetrate the centre of the fireball and find myself in the line of bombers. To my right, lagging behind, burned U-88, damaged by the explosion of the leading. Stunned by the unexpected explosion, I thought for some seconds what to do. In panic, throwing out bombs, Junkers began to turn in the opposite direction. I throw the plane at the nearest on the right. He, with a turn, goes into a dive. A line on the right wing, and out of it stretched streams of smoke. But the bomber with a dive angle of 40 degrees pulls to the line of defence. I transfer the sight to the left engine and give a point-blank line. A streak of black smoke and fire erupted from the engine and centre wing. U-88 falls and crashes into the steep bank of the Molochnaya River. I'm making a combat turn to gain altitude. I see an airplane falling on the side, shot down by Zherdev's pair, and up to 10 parachutists hanging in front, above. 2 of them, with a twisted dome, quickly go to the ground. To the left, behind, leaving to the west part of the group of the enemy, caught up by the 6 Yaks. I remembered Ostrovsky shot by parachute. In indignation, I was about to command my pilots to shoot the parachutists, but I heard Zherdev's voice. "No fuel. I'm going home. The parachutists are descending on our troops." I glanced at the gas gauge. The arrow is almost at 0. Fuel is running out, we have to leave. At the first airfield we landed. Golyubev's engine stopped when planning to land. I examined my plane, no damage, only scratches. Technicians of the neighbouring regiment, who saw our battle, treated us with great respect and quickly refueled the aircraft. We returned to Rozovka. The group was met by Yakov Zimud. The battle could be seen from here. "Comrade Major, why did you take such a risk?" My heart even pinched at the sight of the explosion in the air, he said, not raising his eyes from the ground. "It's all right, Yakov. The main thing is that the bombing was thwarted, Comrade Major." Sokov intervened in the conversation. "You do not count the 3rd bomber. They say that it was not you who shot it down, but it caught fire from the explosion." "Don't be indignant, Konstantin. We're not fighting for the score. Although I won't hide, this decision of Zayev's hurt me. Our further conversation was interrupted by a dull rumble coming from a great height. We realized that a long-range scout was coming to our deep rear. A red rocket soared over the control center, and immediately a pair of fighters took off on duty. You can't intercept it that way. A wasted flight, I thought aloud and headed for the control center. We should land the duty pair. It's a wasted flight. Without the locator, pilots have already lost it. I ordered to raise the duty pair. Let them go and shoot down. Zayev interrupted me. We need to organize interception from the position of duty in the air. Tomorrow I'll do it, I reluctantly replied, and took the duty officer's log to see if there were any irregularities in the flights of the long-range scout. I leafed through the magazine, and myself feel that the indignation for the unjustly uncounted junkers in me has not yet passed. Having written out the time of the scout's flight over our airfield in the past days, went out. Then carefully analyzed the data. The next morning, at the estimated time, we took off in a pair with George Golyubov, barraging by pendulum method south of Melitopol. Our pair was searching on the supposed flight route of the scout. I set the altitude so as to detect the enemy against the background of the sky. When flying from Melitopol to the south, I heard Golyubov's voice. 100th. Exactly to the right, above the airplane. I looked and rejoiced. 1,000 meters above us, with a course to the east, was a long-range scout U-88. Well done. Jora, you saw the scout. In order not to spook the target and let it pass to our side of the front line, I take a course to the west and gain altitude. We're camouflaged against the ground. Once in a while I look behind me for the enemy, keeping him in visual range at all times. I can't let him out of my sight, I think. Now it's time to go after him. We make a sharp turn. Above our airfield at an altitude of 8,000 meters, finally catch up with the enemy. It was at this time that the Junkers pilots discovered us. The plane began to turn steeply to the west, but the escape routes were cut off. With a combat turn, I go to the side of the Junkers, and with a slight dive open fire on the cockpit and the center wing. I know there are gas tanks in it. Fire and a jet of black smoke burst out of the Junkers. Ready. Flying away, I thought, and then I saw the wingman coming in to attack. I understand he wants to finish to destroy the enemy for sure. But it is dangerous, there may be an explosion. Do not touch it, Golyubov. He's on fire. Let's see where it falls. Descending aside, we followed the scout. He, burning, pulled towards Molochnaya. It even seemed to me that the Junkers could go behind the front line. Suddenly an explosion at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Smoking pieces of the former scout sprinkled on the ground. That's it. It's done. We can go for a landing. Soon came confirmation from the ground connection that fell pieces of Junkers with the pilots. Apparently they were killed in the attack. Andrei Trud was the first to congratulate the victory. He had learned the details from somewhere. He came up, smiling ear to ear. Good, Commander, you've nailed him. Now it won't buzz even close to our airfield. I'm bringing intelligence. He so skillfully imitated the dull hum of a German airplane that I laughed. It was reported that the entire crew of the Scout consisted of aces awarded with Iron Crosses. There were aces, but floated away. Smiled Trud, expressing his joy. In the evening, Zayev flew out on U-2 to inspect the airfield planned for us to relocate. On the way back, he turned to the neighboring regiment. He decided to approach the airfield on a strafing flight, but having caught the ground with his wheels, he scapotized. The airplane was crashed, and Zayev was hospitalized for a long time. On Dizasov's orders, I took command of the regiment. I tried to do everything to make the situation inside the regiment was calm, and the combat work was intense. We made sorties to cover the concentration of our troops for a breakthrough in the area of Big Tokmak, conducted frequent air battles and reconnaissance. The enemy stubbornly resisted, but it was obvious that he did not hope to stay here. You fly and bitterly see columns of smoke over Zaporozhye fascists are burning the city. Preparations of the 4th Ukrainian Front to break through the enemy defense on the Molochnaya River in the area of Bolshoy Tokmak forced the enemy to concentrate his troops here. But the unexpected blow of our troops on Melitopol and the liberation of this major node of enemy defences, the introduction of a mobile group of mechanized and cavalry corps, led to the breakthrough of the defence. Our units were rapidly advancing in the direction of the Crimea. The hastily retreating enemy, having suffered heavy losses, hid behind the Dnieper. Elastic defence, about which the fascists shouted so much after Kursk, under the mighty pressure of the Soviet troops, collapsed. The advancing formations liberated Kherson, cut off the Crimean grouping of the enemy from the land, seized the bridgehead behind Sivash. Preparation for the liberation of the Crimea from the Nazi invaders began. As in the years of the Civil War, in the troops sounded the call, "Give Crimea." Our division, covering the mobile group of the front, concentrated on airfields south of Kakhovka. The 26th anniversary of the October Revolution was celebrated by the regiment, based in Askania Nova. Soon after the holiday, the commander of the 8th Air Army, Timofey Timofeyevich Kryukin, a famous hero volunteer pilot who fought in Spain, arrived in our unit. Having heard my report on the state of the regiment, on its readiness for active operations, the general set the task. Your regiment is assigned to cover the bridgehead on Sivash and crossings of the army of Kryza, concentrated for the liberation of the Crimea. Conditions there are very difficult. There are few bridge crossings. Many infantry units are crossing in the ford, and the water is now terribly cold. We must do everything to prevent the bombing of our troops. Think how to solve this problem successfully and report to me. Comrade Commander, we've thought about it. I'm ready to report to you now. Yes? Yes, sir. Immediately cover the crossings and repel the raids can only be simultaneous entry into the battle of the main forces or the entire regiment, not wasting them on barraging small groups from dawn to dark. The regiment must be kept in a fist before the battle and strike a powerful blow. Before the enemy is detected, the squadrons are on duty, in readiness for immediate departure on alert. This method is possible only if there is a locator and radio station at my disposal, and the approval of such action by the division headquarters. Under these conditions, the regiment will successfully accomplish the task you have set. General TTT, Kryukin listened attentively to the proposals on the conduct of combat operations, asked several questions, clarified tactical techniques. It was evident that he deeply and seriously considered everything that was reported to him. Well, the idea is correct. You will receive the locator, instructions to the division will be given. Keep in mind that you have taken on a great responsibility. I wish you success, he said before departure. The task of the regiment is set. We must reasonably fulfill the responsible decision of the commander. We held a number of classes, solved the introduction, tried to do everything to make the regiment services. All pilots clearly know their responsibilities. 2 days later at the regiment control room, radio operators deployed locator Rus 2. The layout of the situation was taken to the command room. Fedorov's squadron flew to the airfield. It was our ambush at the very shore of Sivash. Its task was to be on duty as a squadron to fly out by sight or on command from the regiment's CP. 2 squadrons, 8 airplanes each, performed alternating duty in the first and second readiness at the airfield in Askania Nova. The regiment's management staff studied the locator and its capabilities to detect the air enemy. It was important for us to know what the locator can give, to be able to competently set tasks for its calculation. On the very first day of covering the crossing with a new method, the locator gave out the detection of a group of enemy bombers gathering over Zankoy. In the same seconds, over the control room soared red flare departure on alert duty 8. Immediately another squadron took its position in the first readiness. Fyodorov on the airfield of the ambush was given a command by telephone to raise the duty link. On the tablet, according to the locator data, were visible serifs of the group of bombers and our fighters. We give the course for the group to go to the estimated point of interception. Soon heard the information on the radio. Ahead of 3-9 bombers with fighters. We're going to attack. Soon the voices of the pilots were heard on the air. They overlapped each other, and it was difficult to make out what was going on there. Now everything depended on the battle management by the group commander, on the initiative actions of the pilots. After a while, the details of the battle became known. Attacking successively 3 9U-87s and accompanying Messerschmitts, the pilots of the regiment shot down 7 bombers and 1 Mi-109, forced the enemy to drop bombs over the territory of their troops. We had no losses. Everyone returned to the airfield in joyful excitement. In this battle especially distinguished Klubov and Zherdev, who shot down 2 bombers each. By the evening flew out on a free hunt for Zherdev. Warned from the CP about the appearance of the enemy, it even before the approach of reinforcements from the airfield met 2 9U-87s under the cover of 6 Mi-109s and entered the battle. Zherdev's pair attacked the bombers and shot down the leader. Despite the fact that our fighters were immediately pinned down by the Messerschmitts, the bombers dropped their load before reaching the crossing and turned south. Covering a pair of Zherdev, Chistov and Samsonov shot down 2 Mi-109s. But these failures did not stop the enemy. He continued to try to break through to the crossings, changing tactics and methods. Enemy groups began to approach the target at low altitude. It was difficult to detect them with a locator. This led to delayed sorties for interception from the airfield Uskania Nova. In these cases, the reflection of the raid was entrusted to pilots sitting in ambush at Sivash. In one of the raids on our crossings were up to 40 bombers U-87, covered by 6 fighters. Fedorov's squadron was the first to intercept. The pilots acted bravely and selflessly. They tactically competently conducted the battle, resolutely fulfilled the task. 6 bombers and 2 Messerschmitt were shot down. Squadron defended the sky over the crossings. Once my duty in the first readiness coincided with another raid of the enemy. Having taken off on command from the control center, we 8 went to Sivash. Because of a small inaccuracy of the calculated course given to us at first glance, we went to the side of the enemy group. And there were 30 bombers going to the crossing. Having no time to go to the rear hemisphere of the group, we resolutely attacked from the side. Here in the sight, the rightmost in the bearing. A line and the U-87 burst into flames. Falling, he fell to pieces. Our whole group piled on top of the others. Dropping bombs into Sivash, the enemy planes hastily turned to the south and left from our attacks. It was impossible to chase them, because from the CP reported about the approach of a new group. Apparently, having learned about the fate of their predecessors, the bombers did not go to Sivash, but turned to their airfield. In this battle we shot down 7 Junkers, not counting those who were shot down and landed involuntarily not far from the battle site. Once the enemy with 3 9U-87s made a raid late in the evening, already at dusk. The duty squadron under the command of Pavel Eremin, who flew out on alert, defeated a group of bombers over Sivash, shooting down 11 machines. For this battle, the ground command sent a commendation to the pilots of the squadron. Autumn weather, with low clouds and fogs, increasingly limited the flights of both enemy aircraft and our fighters. On such days, group raids became less. Only sometimes single bombers or pairs of Messerschmitts appeared in the area of Sivash. The most experienced pilots flew out to intercept them, usually in pairs, searching independently, or they were guided to the target from the forward control centers. Comparatively calm situation over the crossings due to bad weather conditions allowed me to start flights for free hunting. On the enemy's air communications between Crimea and Odessa, I dreamed about these flights while I was still in Kuban. I carried fuel tanks behind me, hoping that they would provide interception of targets at long range over the Black Sea. I was always fascinated by free hunting flights. They were characterized by intense action, great risk, but the results could be very significant. Despite the dangers, it was interesting to find a target, skillfully go to it, and destroy suddenly, with the first blow. In this, in addition to inflicting losses on the enemy, was the excitement of combat. Free hunting. In the enemy rear requires from pilots high moral and psychological qualities, the ability to quickly and accurately navigate, to pilot the aircraft perfectly, sniper shooting, destroying the target with the first attack. These qualities were forged in the course of combat sorties, reconnaissance flights to the enemy rear. One day, when the clouds covered the sky, I was able to distract myself from the management of the regiment and quietly fly out on a hunt over the Black Sea. Savin's airplane was prepared for me. The radio station on mine had failed. Before boarding the plane, I saw G. Golubev wearing an inflatable vest. I think that the vest will not be required. Why? We will fly over the sea, asked the wingman in bewilderment. If the engine fails or will be hit the plane, it is better to dive to the bottom immediately than to suffer in the cold waves. No one will save us there in such weather. I calmed him. Seeing that Georgie was looking at me with bewilderment, I finished, everything will be fine, don't worry. The first part of the flight we made, generating fuel from suspended tanks, saving it in the main ones. This prevented the tank rupture during overloads in combat or their explosion when hit by enemy bullets and shells. We crossed the coastline west of Skadovska. Under us the sea raging in a 9-point storm. Ahead, in the field of visibility, only white crests of dark waves and black clouds hanging at a height of less than 100 meters. Soon this gloomy environment takes its toll on morale. The sound of the engine seems louder and rougher. The eye involuntarily stops more often on the instruments. A small rise in oil and water temperature is alarming, distracts attention from the search for the target. And it is necessary to keep strictly in 20 meters above the waves. We go tacking in 100–200 kilometers from the shore, carefully looking through the murky horizon and hanging fringe of low clouds. And here is the target. A 3-engine transport airplane U-52 is coming towards us. Disguising myself from below, I go in for an attack. The enemy detected us and also pressed against the water. The enemy gunner opened fire. Smoke trails reached my plane. But I managed to catch a Junkers in my sights. First turn on the enemy gunner, the second on the fuselage, and I immediately skip U-52. By the sound of firing, I realized that the cannon and large caliber machine guns did not work. I reloaded my weapons. I mentally scold my gunsmith. Now I come in from the side and hit the cockpit and the left side of the center wing. Only 3 wing machine guns are firing. But an accurate hit on the center plane helps. Fire and a jet of smoke bursts from there. After flying about 200 meters, the flaming U-52 clings to the waves and explodes. Dissatisfied with the failure of the weapon, I turn home and suddenly see another U-52 going to the Crimea. We approach stealthily from below, above the very waves. At close range, I aim at the center wing. I give a turn and skip under the wing of the enemy machine. I turn around and see a big circle of fire from the exploded airplane on the water. It's done. We can go home. When we returned, at the parking lot we figured out the reasons for the failure of armament, which prevented the first attack to shoot down the enemy aircraft. On the plane, standing idle for a long time in this fall weather, ammunition had dried out. The only thing that saved the culprits from severe punishment was that both airplanes we encountered were shot down. In the following days, when the weather in the area of Sivas excluded the actions of enemy aircraft, I managed to fly out twice to hunt over the Black Sea, and each time managed to shoot down from the first attack on the plane. However, the division leadership did not approve of these sorties, considering them dangerous, ineffective. I was of a different opinion. I decided to increase the time for search and interception of enemy planes to prepare a landing site on the seashore near Skadovske, sent there an airfield construction team. But he could not realize his plans. In the 4th flight to hunt over the sea, I found a U-52. It was sneaking, at a height of 70 meters, hiding in the fringe of clouds hanging down to the water. Approaching it from below, I hit the cockpit with a cue of all weapons. The airplane went steeply toward the water. I immediately gave the control stick away from me and hit him in the belly with the second cue. And then, with a jerk of the handle on myself, I jumped just a few meters over the tail of the falling plane. I flew into the cloud and immediately came out of it. I was in a bad mood. I almost collided. I was only a few meters away from death. Our pair took a course to the north. Only when the ground appeared there was calmness. My wingman Golubev couldn't resist telling the pilots about it. The conversation, apparently, reached the leadership. 2 days later, I was summoned by the commander of the army TTT, Kryukin. We had an unpleasant conversation. Well, tell me, how do you chase fascist planes over the Black Sea without the permission of your superiors and almost crash into them? Do you want to visit the Sea King Poseidon? These flights to hunt over the sea immediately stop. Comrade Commander, I'm a combat pilot. I have to fight. fight over land in groups. I absolutely forbid you to fly over the sea. If you even get hit there, there's no chance of rescue. We have no right to lose a double hero in such experiments. That's it. The dream, nurtured since Cuban, is over. Because of my partner's intemperance, I lost the opportunity to conduct interesting combat work. I can't hide I was upset, but I didn't scold my wingman. I realized that he told about this episode without malice, but simply as a rare case of combat practice. Soon the division was withdrawn to Chernigovka for additional formation. On the airfield Ascania Nova sat the 9th Guards Regiment. One of its squadrons descended on my chosen field airfield near Skadovske. The spoiled mood was not corrected even by the meeting of the new year. I could only be satisfied with the fact that I prompted others how to conduct combat work on air communications over the Black Sea in the blockaded Crimea. From the coastal airfield near Skadovsk Squadron, under the command of Vladimir Lavrinenkov, for a short time shot down over the Black Sea more than 30 aircraft. I knew the squadron commander well. With this remarkable pilot, skillful organizer of the battle met after his escape from captivity, at a conference of hunters for aircraft and ground targets. Mutual sympathy between us later grew into a strong friendship. Vladimir had much to respect and love for. A brave air fighter, he showed himself a true master in the Battle of Stalingrad. Lavrinenkov successfully fought in Ukraine. A hard and heroic test for him was a collision with Focke-Wulf 189 in the battle near Melitopol. The brave officer was captured while unconscious. Interrogations with beatings, persuasions to betray the motherland began. However, all thoughts of this true patriot were directed to escape to new fights with the enemy. Hero of the Soviet Union V. Lavrinenkov Hitlerites decided to send to Berlin to Reichsminister Göring. They were taken under guard into him and a pilot attack pilot. Not reaching Odessa, the brave officers jumped out of the car at night. Advancing stealthily through Ukraine, they met with partisans who brought them to our side of the front. Having experienced the hardships of fascist captivity, Lavrinenkov fought bravely in the skies of the fatherland. He finished the war twice hero of the Soviet Union. Chernigovka. It reminded me the days of the desperate breakthrough from the encirclement in the unforgettable 41st year. But there was no time to recollect and rest. I was appointed commander of the 16th Guards Regiment, and the first task to accelerate the introduction into the combat formation of young flying replenishment arrived from the reserve air regiments. They had no combat experience. It was necessary to teach them our battle-tested tactics, piloting aircraft in combat formation and air combat. Difficulties were compounded by changes in the leadership of the regiment. Left for training deputy for political part Maprednoy, and the new one has not yet been appointed. Gone commanders in other regiments Kryukov and Lukyanov. In their place were promoted squadron commanders experienced pilots Klubov and Olifrenko, who in the new position themselves required help. Part of the experienced pilots went to get new airplanes. They were transported from near Baku, and bad weather in the Caucasus Mountains delayed this operation for a long time. There were days of intense training. Flights, classes, debriefings filled all the time. I was in a hurry. I knew that the better we prepare the flying and technical staff, the more active and effective we would be in performing combat missions. Here, in Chernigovka, there was a big and important personal event. Maria was transferred to the sanitary unit of our airfield battalion. We registered marriage with her, and had a modest wedding with close friends. My bachelor life was over. I became a family man. Now I had to think and take care of my close friend, my beloved wife. In early February, after a flying day, I was urgently summoned by the division commander Zusov. He immediately, as soon as I walked into him, without explanation ordered, surrender the regiment, pay in full and immediately depart for Moscow. Seeing my bewilderment, he continued, "The order is to second you to the Air Force headquarters. Appoint you somewhere, apparently, with a promotion." This message did not make me happy. It was a pity to part with my native regiment, with my pilots. In Moscow I went, as prescribed, to the personnel department, introduced myself to General Orakov. I heard from him. I congratulate you on your appointment as head of the Combat Training Department of the Fighter Aviation of the Air Force. I didn't expect this in any way. I was simply shocked by such a proposal. Congratulations are in vain, Comrade General. I have no desire to leave the front until the end of the war. That's why I'm asking you to return me to my regiment. Perhaps I spoke harshly, but I couldn't do otherwise. I'm surprised. General Orikov waved his hands. You are appointed to the post of general, and you refuse. You are an experienced pilot and an excellent tactician of air combat. You are needed here, at the headquarters. Your experience and knowledge should be used for mass training of excellent fighter pilots, he said fervently. It was obvious that the general expected a completely different answer. After hearing my categorical refusal for the second time, Orikov made a phone call somewhere. Tomorrow you must arrive at the Chief Marshal of Aviation AA. A. Novikov. A. Novikov. Pass will be ordered. Already leaving the headquarters, once again thought about everything. I will not hide I was somewhat embarrassed by such a game of fate. There were times when I was threatened with removal from the post of squadron commander, even almost went to the penalty company. Now I'm being offered a general's post. But this job is not for me. No, I can't sit in the Air Force headquarters. I want to be at the front, where there are fierce battles among the combat pilots. With them I must reach Berlin. The next day Marshal Novikov met me with words. Well, do not want to leave the front. Yes, Comrade Air Chief Marshal. That's right. Go to Yakovlev's design bureau and fly the Yak-3 experimental airplane. We must switch to our own equipment. Our airplanes are better than foreign ones. For several days we flew Yak-3s. I got to know this beautiful fighter. What a pity that we did not have such machines at the beginning of the war. However, I had some remarks. And first of all on the armament. It consisted of one 20mm gun and two large-caliber machine guns. Not enough. After the end of the overflight program, I frankly expressed my opinion of the fighting machine to a S. Yakovlev. An excellent airplane for fighting with enemy fighters, but to fight with bombers needs a stronger armament. It needs at least 2 or 3 guns. Such weapons, as now, will not ensure the destruction of the first attack U-88 and Heinkel 111, and especially armoured Henschel 129. I talk about it and I see that my judgments and advice are not very readily accepted. We parted each at his own opinion, as it seemed to me in strained relations. So in the evening the designer S.A. Lavochkin suddenly appeared at my hotel. He invited me to come to his design bureau to familiarize myself with his new La-7 fighter. I liked the new twin-gun airplane. I immediately agreed with Lavochkin to take the first 5 La-7s for combat tests in frontline conditions. Having finished my business in Moscow, with Novikov's permission I flew to Chernigovka and started again to prepare the regiment's personnel for combat operations. Once, at the end of April, having missed the battles, went out to fly over the airplanes sent to the regiment. As they say, took my soul away. I performed complex aerobatics, flew inverted flight, shaving. I will not hide I was pleased that I had not lost my skills. Immediately after landing I was informed about a summons to the division headquarters. I went to Dyzusov. He met me on the porch of the headquarters. He looked at me reproachfully and said, "Pokrishkin, I always thought you were a smart man. But I saw what you do in flight, and I doubt it. Don't worry, Comrade Commander. With such pilotage I will always manage." I answer him, "You'll manage. And other pilots, especially young ones. They are trying to imitate you and will fight." Think about it, Dyzusov reproached me and invited me to his office. I followed him and thought, but Dyzusov is right. My aerobatic tricks can cost a lot of imitators among the flying staff. And I decided it's time to end this forever. Here read the received order. Dyzusov handed me a paper. I see that by order of the Air Force commander I was appointed commander of our division. "And where are you going?" I asked Dyzusov, appointed commander of the Air Corps. Before the transfer of affairs, ordered to relocate the division to the 3rd Ukrainian Front. Prepare a flight of regiments to Odessa, and there we will sign the act of transfer. For some time I stood in thought, realizing the new situation. Division commander flies on combat missions, rarely staff work, management of aviation on the front line do not allow you to often fight. But is so important for our victory personal account. Since I am entrusted with such a position, I must do everything to justify the high honor. I began to prepare the division for the flight to the front. I urgently sent Maria to her mother in Novosibirsk. I realized that in a combat situation there would be no time for personal family affairs. The troubles began in a new commanding capacity. Orders and instructions were given, and finally flight to Odessa to present and coordinate all issues with the commander of the Air Army, General V.A. Sudets. The flight echelon flew to the prepared airfields, technical staff began to arrive by ground transportation. And then a new input the division is reassigned to another front, under IASI. The relocation to the 2nd Ukrainian Front began. We flew to the airfield of preliminary concentration of the division north of Soroka in Yampol. Having sent there the flying staff of the regiments, the headquarters got busy with the technical staff. I managed to get 3 flights of Li-2 to transfer the minimum number of technicians needed to service the overflowed aircraft. The rest were loaded into boxcars and left by rail. Having solved all organizational issues, Golubev and I flew our combat aircraft to Yampol. On the route we passed towns and villages familiar to me from the battles at the beginning of the war. On the left Frunzovka, where Leonid Dyachenko is buried, who died in an unequal battle. On the right Mayaki airfield, from which we flew to combat missions, but not all returned. Here is Yampol. Anatoly Sokolov and Alexei Ovsyankin were forced to land near it. The courageous pilots preferred death to captivity. Now, after 3 years of war, we are returning to Dniester and Prut as experienced air fighters. From here we will take revenge on the enemy for our fallen combat friends. In Yampol, Dusov informed me that our division was included in the 7th Air Corps, and tomorrow I should be at the headquarters of General Alexander Vasilievich Yutin. Dusov postponed the handing over of cases until my return. In the morning he ordered my Deputy Lieutenant Colonel Zayev on the organization of pilots to study the area of the upcoming combat operations before the arrival of aircraft technicians from near Odessa, and myself flew to the headquarters of the Corps. He was stationed in Stefanesti. For 2 days agreed on all issues and flew around the airfields allocated for our regiments. When reporting to Yutin, unexpectedly arrived Zayev and Makhnov. I anxiously asked what happened, why the deputy and political officer left the division without command. I decided to fly in and report. In training flights crashed Squadron Commander Olifrenko. Klubov shot at the motorist, killed him. What is being done? What is being done? Shook his head Zayev. He listened attentively to the message. Acting Regiment Commander Reklov, without waiting for the arrival of the technical staff by rail, began to conduct flights. In the plane, Olifrenko bag with tools in the tail compartment violated the alignment. In a training air combat fighter snapped into a flat corkscrew. The pilot did everything to save the airplane. He ejected from it only at the very ground. The parachute did not have time to open fully and Olifrenko died. After his funeral, on the way to the dormitory, Klubov quarreled with the motorist and shot him with a pistol. Such a start in the position of division commander struck me as a thunderbolt. And what did you do? How did you allow flights without technical staff, as well as a wake with alcohol? I asked. Return immediately to Yampol, and with the arrival of the technical staff to organize the ferrying of regiments to the front line. I will strictly deal with all these facts when I arrive. 2 days later the regiments flew to the airfields Stefanesti and Likhnesti. The very next day began combat work to cover the front edge of our defences. By agreement with General Avyutin, commander of the 16th Regiment, appointed Boris Glinka. For combat control at the front edge of the defence placed an advanced fighter guidance point with our constant call sign Tiger. The situation in the air was still not complicated. The enemy carried out raids rarely and in small groups. This allowed us to gradually introduce young pilots into the combat formation. Groups of 8 led experienced air fighters. One day before the flight of my group on patrol to the plane came to the captain, introduced himself and reported. Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, I am an investigator of the Prosecutor's Office of the Air Army. I arrived with an order to arrest Klubov. Allow me to fulfill the prosecutor's order. This reminder of the case with Klubov immediately turned the thoughts focused on the upcoming combat flight. I am now leading the group on a mission and ask you to do nothing until my return. When I return, we will deal with this case. During the whole flight, the thought of Klubov never left my mind, even with the attack of dozens of Fokkers, which, without taking the fight, went to Yassi. The mood is disgusting. Intuition suggested that in this incident was something unclear, and such an excellent air fighter as Klubov was a pity. I could not believe that he had acted so recklessly. After landing, there was a conversation with the investigator. Comrade Captain, fly to the scene of the accident in Yampol and deal seriously with this case, I advised the investigator. You will be dropped off there by a pilot on U2. Tomorrow I will fly to you. There we will decide what to do next. The next day by evening I flew to Yampol. I went to the dugout. I saw the investigator standing there, smiling. I was already worried about Klubov, and here was this smile. I thought with a feeling of dislike, what's he happy about? Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, it's all cleared up. Klubov didn't shoot and there are no casualties. Everything is made up. The words of the investigator both stunned and pleased me. I looked at the captain. I see his face is cheerful, pleasant. Thank you for flying here and sorting things out, I said, shaking his hand. And where is the motorist? I want to talk to him personally. During the conversation with the motorist, it turned out that he himself was to blame for the quarrel. He didn't look at the officer in the darkness and insulted him. Klubov showed unnecessary passion and fired upwards. For this, of course, he was punished. Flying to the division headquarters, I thought how to understand the hasty report. Couldn't Zayev himself figure it all out? The issue of Klubov with the investigator was resolved favourably, but a few days later the front prosecutor asked me to fly to him. He showed me a telephonogram from Moscow. Here, read the order to arrest Klubov for the murder of the motorist. You ask him not to be tried, and I agree with you, but I am ordered to report to Moscow about his punishment for hooliganism. Logically, everything was right and there was no need to argue. And you, Alexander Ivanovich, do you know that a distorted report of this incident went to Moscow from your division? Said the prosecutor at parting. All this should be investigated on the spot, but there is no time to investigate. We have to command combat operations and restore order. The situation became more complicated, and it was necessary to pay all attention to combat work. In the second half of May, air reconnaissance revealed an increased concentration of enemy aircraft on the airfields nearest to us. The command of the front and the Air Army decided to strike a massive blow to the concentration of enemy aircraft. The division was assigned the task of blocking enemy fighter airfields during the actions of our bombers and attack aircraft. At dawn, all regiments of the division left for this task in groups of 6 to 8 airplanes. Pilots in the battle acted bravely and persistently. They not only prevented the enemy fighters from taking off, but also suppressed anti-aircraft weapons that interfered with the assault, destroyed aircraft on the ground. Based in the bend of the Sareta and Prut rivers, Hitler's and Romanian aviation units suffered significant losses from the sudden strikes of our aviation. This subsequently, at the end of May, facilitated the fighting of our troops against the enemy ground forces. The German Fascist Command, seeking to disrupt preparations for the offensive of the Second Ukrainian Front, as well as to improve its position, undertook strong tank counterattacks. The enemy aviation also intensified its actions. The enemy's preparation for offensive actions did not go unnoticed by our command. Putin warned me to be ready for such changes in the situation. The division was fully staffed with pilots and aircraft. This made it possible to respond to the strength of the enemy force and cover the troops to carry out simultaneously 2 or 3-8. This increase in patrolling groups in the air led to a threefold increase in the number of combat sorties for each pilot. Remembering Suvorov's rule, every soldier must know his maneuver, he flew himself to all units and held classes with pilots in regiments, warned about the expected tense situation in the air, and reported his thoughts on the upcoming performance of tasks. If you want to win in the upcoming battles, you will have to fly to the tasks 3 times more than now. We agree, Comrade Commander, to fly more often, but only in large groups, I heard in reply. That's what I expected from the pilots. The answer could not be different. The flight crew was involved in the development of this decision. I knew that there would be no whining about overloading in the sorties. Then, in each regiment, in the squadron worked out the order of sorties, the interaction of groups. With a calm soul, I arrived at the point of guidance of our division. From the point of guidance, deployed on top of a hill, overgrown with small forest, well viewed the surrounding airspace. From here we could see the panorama of the battle that had already begun. Up to 50 enemy tanks and armoured personnel carriers with infantry were coming to our positions, raising dust. Our artillery from the depths and anti-tank artillery, located near the trench, was beating on them. To the site of the battle advanced our tanks. The first attack was repulsed. On the field burned tanks and armoured personnel carriers of the enemy. The rest took cover in the lowlands, and from there were firing at our positions. A brigade of Katyusha rocket mortars, which was standing near the targeting point, opened fire on them. Its salvos, rockets passing over us, and especially a long thunder-like rumble in the place of striking, as in a mighty thunderstorm, made a strong impression. Immediately columns of smoke from burning military equipment rose in the places of enemy accumulations. Without changing positions after the salvo, as it was in the first years of the war, the calculators set up rockets. All this emphasized their faith in the reliability of air cover by our fighters. However, this time patrolled only 1/6 from a neighbouring division of our corps. Soon came up from the south 12 Messerschmitts, attacked her. The fight was unequal and brutal. Several burning enemy and our planes crashed into the ground. The second 6 fighters of the neighbouring division came to the rescue. And the enemy added 12 Focke-Wulf 190s. It was clear these groups of the enemy had the purpose to clear the air from our fighters. Soon we could expect a flight of bombers. I realized that it was necessary to change the schedule of patrolling small groups of fighters. And although the time to cover our division had not come, I ordered by telephone to headquarters to raise immediately in the air 2-8 from the 16th Regiment. The group came in time, but only 10 airplanes under the leadership of Squadron Commander Eremin. Immediately contacted the division headquarters and requested. Why sent instead of 2-8 planes only 10? 100th, in a hurry, had time to raise only 1 group. In flight to U8 Klubov. This message has calmed down, but psychological tension from the expected enemy raid did not pass. Experience suggested that now there will be large groups of bombers. And that's right, from the south in the distance, showed Junkers. Their intermittent hum soon drowned out all other sounds. Eremin, I'm Tiger. Up to 40 Ju-88s with fighters are approaching the front over Iasi. Attack the bombers immediately. Eremin shoots down the leader with an overhead attack on the front 6. I see him on fire, then collapses in the air. Immediately Eremin's pair was attacked by 4 Fe-190s. Fighting with them, ours shot down 1 Fokker. At this time Starchikov's 4, covered by Ivanov's pair, attacked the second 6 bombers and shot down 2 machines. In a second attack, Onyshchenko and Nikitin lit up 2 more bombers. The enemy, having dropped bombs untargeted, turned to the south. At this time above me appeared 8 Klubov. Having contacted it, I ordered. 3 9 Ju-87s with escort fighters are coming from Yas. Attack them on approach. In the first attacks, Klubov and Petukov shot down 2 bombers and covering their wingmen 3 Fokkers. The enemy in a panic dropped bombs in the location of their troops and, scattering the formation, with a decline began to leave in the direction of Yas. 2 6s of the 100th Regiment came to replace them. Groups Eremin and Klubov, having successfully completed the battle, went to the airfield. Without suffering losses, they shot down 10 enemy planes and 3 were shot down. The use of reinforced patrol groups justified themselves. but it was too early to rejoice. There were heavy battles ahead. Observing the air, I saw a pair of cobras coming over us at low altitude. "I'm Tiger, who's coming over me?" "Tiger, I'm Petukov. Pursued the fleeing bombers and shot down one U-87 over IRC. I'm going home." "Petukov, I'm 100. Why are you going AWOL?" "I strictly forbid you to break away from your group." Vladimir Petukov's behavior to go in pairs in pursuit of bombers leaving the battle worried me. I knew Petukov well, a brave pilot. He has on his account 3 shot-down long-range scouts U-88. He came to us in the division during the transfer of aircraft from the Baku Air Defense District in the spring of the 44th year. This air fighter had just begun to gain experience in group combat in frontline conditions. I understood his eagerness to equal the number of downed airplanes with the best pilots of the regiment. However, this zeal led to recklessness. It could end sadly. Coded order on the radio, I obliged the commander to sort out this dangerous violation with the pilots and punish Petukov. Just had time to pass the order to the division headquarters. I take the microphone again in my hands. More than 20 fighters, Focke-Wulf, 190 approached the front line for assault. The group of the 104th Regiment, which had not had time to change, and the 8 under the command of Chistov, which came up to replace it, were aimed at the enemy. There was a battle between fighters and fighters. In the air was the roar of forced engines, heard the cues of guns and machine guns. In the radio speaker, overlapping each other, sounded exclamations of pilots. It was impossible to control the battles from the point of guidance. The air is full of shouts attack. Cover behind the Fokker, pull harder. The enemy lost several planes. Fokker's dive began to leave the battle. Enemy assault was thwarted, no losses of their own. In the evening, flying on U2 from the point of guidance to the airfield, I did not see the pilots and technicians playing volleyball and town games, and we recommended to organize these games for psychological discharge at the end of the combat day. I realized that, tired after the brutal fighting, everyone was waiting for dinner and sleep. Surely many would sleep uneasy and restless at night. Early in the morning, after a short rest, 2-8 take off. One striking to fight with bombers leads Klubov. The second, covering from enemy fighters, Rechkalov. No sooner had they asked me for the situation in the air, as I give them a command. Klubov, I'm Tiger. 2 groups of Fokkers are coming from Yas at an altitude of 3,000 or 4,000 meters. Attack them from above. Experienced pilots understood me, as they say, with half a word. The groups went into a set, took a good position. Soon followed a sudden attack of this 8. The Fokkers were forced to drop bombs on their troops, turning around and diving to leave in the direction of Yas. The second group of Fokkers followed the first. In this battle, 3 enemy planes were shot down, and new groups of bombers and fighters were already approaching the front line. Clubs from the southwest 5 9 U-87s and 12 Messers. Attack on the approach. I can see well how from the first attacks 3 Junkers fall burning, and behind them 2 more Fokkers, leaving behind them plumes of black smoke, go to the ground. The enemy scattered rushed in a southerly direction. Pursuing him, ours shot down 4 more planes. I can't help counting. In total, for 2 battles already destroyed 12 enemy planes, and only one of ours was shot down. He sat down in his own territory with retracted landing gear. From the control room, Yutin congratulated Klubov with a brilliant victory. And Petrov's group, which replaced him, dispersed a group of Fokkers with bombs under cover of Messerschmitts, shooting down several planes. Looking at the clock. It's not even 11 yet. The day promises to be hot. The third shift of 12 fighters, led by Ivan Babak, also organized and successfully conducted a battle with 5-9 bombers U-87 and covering them Fokkers and Messerschmitts. In this fight, Babak and Dolnikov shot down 2 planes each and Dmitry Glinka 3. However, success in the battles, apparently, dizzy someone's head. In the middle of the day, to cover the troops again, came 8 Klubov and 6 Rekalov. They were pointed at a large group of U-87s. Klubov attacked 2 9s in succession and shot down 2 U-87s. The experienced commander immediately switched to the battle with the Messerschmitts. Rechkalov, his six, instead of ensuring the actions of the strike group Klubov, rushed to attack the bombers. This was used by the above 8 Messerschmitts and shot down our plane. Apparently, the pilot was engrossed in the attack on U-87s and did not notice the enemy fighters. Klubov's pair found themselves in a difficult position, squeezed by 4 Messerschmitts. Karpov, saving Klubov, was hit by an enemy pair. He was also shot down. An eye from the point of guidance was impossible to put order in this battle because the air was full of shouts of pilots, and I couldn't see who was falling burning. And just at these minutes, bombers U-88 and He-111 came to the front line at altitude. Klubov, Rechkalov. Bombers above you. Stop the fight with the Messers. Attack Junkers and Heinkels. I tried to orient our fighters, but my signal in the air was not perceived. Found in battle, the fighters could not break away from the attacking enemy and go to gain altitude. The tangle of our and enemy planes continued to spin at low altitude. I impatiently looked at the clock. I wanted to hurry up the time. It was about to replace our groups should fly our neighbours. And indeed, the situation was diffused by the arrival of 2/8 of the 100th Regiment. They attacked the approaching bombers from the start. The activity of enemy fighters decreased. This was used by pilots of groups Rechkalova and Klubov to get out of the battle. They were running out of fuel. When leaving, they radioed me about the death of Chistov and Karpov. I saw our cars burning but did not know who was killed. It was necessary to fly out immediately and to understand the reasons for the unsuccessfully conducted battle, to take measures. In the regiment, I first of all learned the circumstances in which shot down Chistov and Karpov, as well as, apparently, led to the death of Petukov and his wingman Barishev. According to the pilot's stories, Petukov's pair broke away from Klubov's group at the beginning of the battle and chased after the U-87 bombers leaving for Yassy. We restored the main milestones of the past battle. It became clear that the cause of disorganization of order in the air was the desire to increase the personal account of downed aircraft, as well as undisciplined Rechkalov. He was responsible for this. Violation of the principles of group air combat cost the loss of experienced pilots and had a negative psychological impact on the flight crew. When conducting a review, pointed out the reasons for the unsuccessful battle, named the culprits, and once again emphasized the requirement. You must always firmly remember that covering your troops on the battlefield is the main task. We must not allow a blow to our units. You cannot, to the detriment of the main goal, to chase the number of personally shot down aircraft. Strict observance of discipline in combat sorties and in battle is the key to success. Any violation of the established order, chatter on the radio lead to unnecessary losses, to failure to fulfill the combat mission. All this together was in this flight. This and led to the death of such experienced pilots such as Chistov and Karpov, and perhaps a couple of Petukov. A sharper conversation took place with Rechkalov. Acting as commander of the regiment, he did not ensure firm discipline in combat. He himself violated the principles of leadership of subordinates in the air, carried away by the pursuit of the number of downed enemy aircraft. Much attention was paid to bringing order to the radio exchange. We decided to hold classes and simulations, to monitor the radio station more strictly, to limit the volume of signals and orders in the air. In the evening, I contacted the Corps Commander Utin, reported on the measures taken and asked to expedite the appointment of the regiment commander Boris Glinka, and in the morning myself took the pilots of the unit on a combat mission. It was necessary to relieve their tension from the unsuccessful battle. The day passed in hot fights, but the pilots fulfilled their task. It was seen that the pilots returned satisfied with their combat work. Late in the evening, in the regiment called Barishev, he reported the circumstances of Petukov's death. That time, pursuing fleeing bombers from the first dispersed group, Petukov shot down another U-87 near Yass. There his pair was also attacked by 8 Fokkers. Repulsing the attacks, he and Barishev pulled toward the front line. But in the unequal battle, Petukov was shot down and did not eject from the plane. Barishev, on a burning airplane, managed to reach ours and sat down forced. It was a pity for Petukov. A good pilot, his combat passion, weak self-discipline in battle let him down. Soon the command of this regiment was taken by the hero of the Soviet Union, Boris Glinka. Skillfully relying on the commanders, the party activists, he quickly put things in order. At party and Komsomol meetings were critically analysed shortcomings in combat work and in the actions of a number of pilots. The regiment began to perform combat work successfully, without losses. In the first days of June, the enemy, having suffered heavy losses and not succeeding in counterattacks, went to a rigid defence. The sharpness of hostilities in the air somewhat subsided. We summarised the results of the past battles. For a week of intense aerial combat, division pilots shot down 139 enemy machines. Our losses during this time amounted to more than 10 pilots and up to 20 aircraft. In the battles distinguished many. Klubov shot down 9 airplanes. Dmitry Glinka and Peter Guchek 6 each, and Komolkov and Dolnikov 5 enemy machines. Taking advantage of some lull in air battles, our division, like others, was replenished with airplanes and young pilots. Disassemblies were held in the regiments. Held a divisional tactical conference. In the training of flight personnel paid the main attention to the flight of combat pairs, links and as part of the 8. Flight and technical staff was preparing for new intense battles. Everyone was looking forward to them. After the message about the victorious offensive of our troops in Belarus, everyone wanted to participate in the Operation Bagration, which began at the end of June. The message about the transfer of our aviation corps to the 2nd Air Army of the 1st Ukrainian Front was greeted with jubilation. After a short preparation, the regiments flew to the airfields of preliminary basing near Rovno. Before the flight, the issue of withdrawal of Lieutenant Colonel Zayev from the division was decided. He was of little help in combat work. Lieutenant Colonel Leonid Goregliad was appointed deputy commander of the division. In an effort to stop the further advance of our fronts, the fascist command urgently transferred up to 20 divisions from Western Europe. By mid-July, favourable conditions were created for the defeat of the fascist grouping in the Lvov and Sandomir directions. The 1st Ukrainian Front was intensively preparing for the offensive. The active role in it was assigned to aviation, including our corps under the command of General Alexander Vasilievich Yutin. After the relocation of the division, I was called to an operational meeting of the leadership of the 2nd Air Army. There I met with the commander of this army, General Stepan Akimovich Krasovsky, and venerable commanders of Air Corps, Generals I.S. Polbin and V.G. Ryazanov, as well as experienced division commanders. Among them, I was the youngest and actually still had no experience in the leadership of the compound. True, the battles on the Prut taught a lot, but I realized that my formation is still ahead. Therefore, I was especially attentive to the instructions of S.A. Krasovsky and to the speeches of commanders. I still had to learn the science of leadership of aviation in the upcoming major offensive operation. Setting specific tasks to the Air Corps, A.V. Yutin to cover the mobile troops of the front on the right side of the breakthrough and escort bombers. Sir Krasovsky directly addressed me. Pokrishkin, your division must reliably cover the 13th Army in the breakthrough of the defence north of Brody and the mobile group entering the breakthrough as part of the 1st Tank Army Katukov and Horse Mechanized Corps Baranov, and to cover the entire path of their offensive. Airfield Basing Division to equip near the village of Mikhailovka, 12 kilometres from the front line. You have to fly there a day before the offensive, hidden from the enemy, otherwise you will get under artillery fire. Can you cope with the tasks? We will, Comrade Commander. Good, you're an excellent air fighter. Now show yourself a mature commander. It was easy to make a promise to the commander, but to fulfill it had to do a lot. Success in accomplishing complex tasks depended on the leadership of the compound unit commanders. In my work, I relied on experienced officers of the headquarters, led by Bar Abramovich, my deputies, unit commanders, political workers. All the multifaceted preparatory work was carried out in a timely manner. It was carefully planned, was conducted in an organized manner. The headquarters clearly controlled the implementation of all planned activities. Skillfully organized party political work political department. Its officers spent days and nights in the units. They took on an additional very important task: assistance and control over the provision of parts of the division with everything necessary. But most importantly, of course, took care of explaining the tasks, bringing them to all personnel. Party and Komsomol meetings were held in the units. Political workers did a lot to ensure that the experience of the best air fighters, their techniques and methods of fighting, were adopted by all flying personnel. At the final stage, they began to prepare for the flight to the main airfield north of Brody. The leading staff secretly reconnoitred the airfield. It was a small field surrounded by forest. Nearby was the leading edge of the enemy's defense. That means that from there our field was clearly visible. On the airfield before us somehow landed a jump squadron. It was immediately covered by enemy artillery fire. We had to fly away. Now it was necessary to land 2 regiments in Mikalovka before the offensive. This is more than 80 airplanes. It was possible to avoid the enemy artillery strike only by observing the secrecy of flight. So at a meeting of senior management of the division discussed measures to relocate units. The most experienced pilots were assigned to ferry airplanes. They took them from the entire division. We imposed a strict ban on radio communication. In advance, within 2 nights, relocated the ground echelon. The technical staff of regiments and soldiers of airfield service battalions strictly performed light camouflage. All work on the preparation of the airfield was carried out in complete darkness. Carefully thought out, and the organization of the flight of regiments, we made a calculation of time. It turned out that the evening hours would not be enough for us. Then we decided to land the first group in the morning, during sunrise. This calculation justified itself. The enemy could not keep observation, the sun blinded him, and our units approached over the very tops of trees. Couple after couple went to the airfield and landed. The second part of the flight echelon flew over in the evening, at dusk. The radio station, controlling radio discipline, did not catch a single conversation of the pilots. For the senior staff of the division and regiments this night was very restless. Alarmed even distant gunshots, bursting shells, and away from the airfield west of it, all the time shook the ground. It seemed that the explosions were moving towards our airplanes, so defenseless they stood on the ground. All night I did not close my eyes, impatiently waiting for dawn and the beginning of our combat work. The faces of staff officers, political workers, regimental commanders somehow greyed from the tension. All shrunk for this anxious night. In the morning, from powerful salvos of guns and Katyusha shook the air, and immediately everyone on the airfield revived. It seemed that the hardest thing was now over. Even many of our cheeks lit up with a blush. All of us involuntarily turned our gaze to the west. Above the front edge of the enemy's defense, a continuous wall of fire, smoke and dust. So began for our division Lviv-Sandomiersko operation. And soon the armada of our P-2 and Tu-2 bombers appeared in the air. Covered by the fighters of our corps, they were heading west. The air offensive began. At the airfield, everyone could not take their eyes off the airplanes going in the sky. That's the power, my soul rejoices. I hear the enthusiastic voice of my wingman. I look at my watch. It's time for our division to fulfill its task. We cover the 13th Army, breaking through enemy defences. In the air exactly on schedule goes the first 8 fighters. The enemy didn't expect the offensive of the First Ukrainian Front. By this time, the fascist command had transferred the main forces of bomber aviation for action against the Belarusian fronts, rapidly advancing to the Vistula. The enemy was sure that it would not be possible to concentrate the Soviet forces so quickly and so secretly on our section. The first day was characterized by fierce fighting with groups of Fokkers and Messerschmitts. In the first and subsequent sorties were shot down several enemy aircraft. Then the group leader reported that Rudenko was hit. Fortunately, he sat down in the location of our troops. Success in combat in some pilots weakened the sense of self-control. This led to severe consequences on the second day of the offensive. In the morning, to cover the mobile troops, introduced into the breakthrough flew a group, led by the regiment commander Boris Glinka. As it became known later, he took a young trainee pilot as a wingman in his pair. And this is despite my strict instructions the leading staff to go into battle only with permanent wingmen, experienced pilots. Having met a group of Messerschmitts, 8B, Glinka attacked head-on. Skipping enemy planes, Glinka turned the 8 to hit the tail of the enemy group. He himself personally made the turn at the limit and broke away from his own, and his wingman lagged behind. In experience, Boris was the first to break into the enemy group. Pursuing the Messerschmitt, he himself was attacked. The wingman could not cover him. The fascists' line pierced Glinka's fighter. Boris ejected from the burning plane, but hit the stabilizer. With a broken leg and broken collarbone, he landed by parachute in the location of the advancing Soviet troops. Looking ahead, I will say that Glinka was treated until the end of the war. We visited him in the hospital more than once, having come to Moscow to participate in the victory parade. Having received a message that Boris Glinka was shot down, I urgently arrived at the regiment from the forward point of guidance. I decided to understand the reasons, to put things in order and help organize further actions in connection with the loss of the regiment commander in battle. Interviewing all those who participated in this flight restored the whole picture, pointed out the specific mistakes of the pilots. Then we made up a group for patrolling. Strike 8 went under my command, and the supporting 4 headed by Andrei Trude. After takeoff, my radio receiver suddenly failed, as it turned out, because of a contact failure during the shaking of the airplane on takeoff. I realized that my return would disorganize the combat flight. I decided to fly. Luckily, the transmitter was working. In the patrol area, north of the already surrounded broad group of the enemy, there was a tiered cloud. Its lower edge was at a height of about 2,000 meters. This significantly hampered our high-speed maneuver in search of the enemy. Already at the end of the patrol, against the background of clouds, detected a large group of aircraft. Up to 40 U-87 bombers and attack aircraft Henschel 129, accompanied by Fokkers, were coming to the area we were covering. I ordered Trud 4 to attack the Fokkers, and his 8 led in the frontal. Bombers, in a panic, dropped bombs in the field, became a circle for mutual defense. Our 4 jumped inside the circle, and I made the first attack on the nearest U-87 from above. The bomber, pierced by a Q, exploded. Dodging the explosion, sharply turned the plane to the left combat. In the second attack from the inside and from above, I set fire to another bomber. Immediately go with a left turn in the attack, suddenly saw above the right wing of a powerful trace of shells. I sharply go half-turn under the Fokker. That soars upward, where it comes under fire of a pair of Zhurdiv and Sukhov. Not waiting for Golubev to take a place next to me, who during the sharp evolution lagged behind me, again go into the attack and shoot down the Henschel. Subsequently, I strike at the departing group of bombers and set fire to the U-87. Suddenly, I see a Henschel 129 coming at me head-on. I turn to him, take him in my sights. The trails of shells and bullets stretch towards me. Almost crashing into the Henschel, I sharply pull the plane up a steep hill and immediately hear explosions in my plane. Got it, bastard, I thought. I took the fighter out of the slide. I see, Henschel turns around after the departing bombers and Fokkers. Considering that my airplane was seriously damaged, I decided not to pursue them, inspecting the airspace. Nearby there are neither their own nor strangers. Only below landed on the field burning U-87, shot down by me in the 4th attack. I set a course for home, and to the east I found our group. Soon an airplane separated from it and approached me. This wingman Golubev took his place in the battle formation. After landing, gathered pilots indignantly said, "Why did you leave the division commander alone? To be eaten by the Fokkers?" There was little fuel left. I gave the command to leave. Rechkalov justified himself. "Those who gave you that right. You were only the leader of the unit. I was the group commander. You knew well that my receiver was defective. I reported it to the whole group, and I would not hear your command." It was not the first time Rechkalov had left the battle, although the pilots of the group were still fighting. I reprimanded him, emphasized that in combat it is necessary to have complete trust, and without it you cannot be sure of the correct actions of a group mate. You cannot win. After sorting out the combat sortie, once again analyzed my actions, I remembered that I heard blows on his plane. But not a single hole was detected. I came to the conclusion that I had heard my own shooting. At the moment of pulling the handle to prevent collision with the Henschel, I delayed the release for a fraction of a second and heard my gunshots. It turns out that when firing at an enemy airplane, my hearing was turned off. But as soon as the enemy plane was out of the sight, my hearing was immediately restored, and I heard my shots. In spite of certain violations in the last battle, the group shot down 8 bombers and 3 Focke-Wulf 190s. 06 This came the next day confirmation from the ground troops, and from the point of guidance. The participation of strong groups in patrolling always brought success. This was shown by subsequent combat events. The main strike group of the 3rd Guards and 4th Tank Armies was approaching Lviv from the east, covered by our division mobile troops on the right wing of the front, having defeated the encircled group of the enemy in the area of Brody, were rapidly advancing to the western Bug and San, trying to preempt the retreating enemy, not to allow him to take a pre-prepared defence on these rivers. The main forces of our division were concentrated on preventing enemy airstrikes on the forward detachments of tanks and cavalry. Air battles were fierce. In one of the combat sorties, a group of 12 fighters of the 104th Guards Air Regiment was led by my Deputy Lieutenant Colonel Goregliad. Already at the end of the patrol from the forward control centre of the Corps, gave the command. Goregliad, a large group of bombers is approaching from the northwest. Attack. Don't let them get to the cavalry. Got it. I'll do it. The group went to approach and soon found 4 9 bombers U-87 accompanied by 16 Focke-Wulf 190. Enemy fighter escorts missed the approach of our groups. Suddenly falling from above, Goregliad successively shot down 2 U-87s. Bobrov his 6 hit the second 9 bombers and, having shot down one, immediately rushed to the Fokkers, tied them up in combat. This was used by the pilots of Goregliada group. In a short period they shot down 3 more U-87s from the other 9. The bombers, having dropped their cargo untargeted, began to hurry away to the west. Having lost 2 Fokkers, the enemy fighters also withdrew from the battle. The use of large groups of fighters in covering ground troops justified itself, although it created an additional load on the flying staff. However, sometimes regimental commanders, underestimating the enemy and seeking to give the pilots a rest, reduced the number of sorties, sent small groups on patrol. In battles with superior enemy forces, such sorties did not give high results, and our groups suffered unnecessary losses. In one of such battles died a brave and talented pilot, Deputy Squadron Commander Alexander Ivashko. His group flew early in the morning to cover the tanks forcing the western Bug River. Ivashko's 4 met with 8 Focke-Wulf 190s. During the frontal attack, an enemy shell exploded in the cockpit of Ivashko's plane, and he, wounded, tried to leave for his airfield. He was covered by wingman Vyacheslav Bereskin, but 4 Fokkers decided not to miss the Soviet plane and rushed in pursuit. Bereskin bravely repelled the first attack, shot down the Fokker. He skillfully fought with 3 enemy fighters, covering the commander. At one point, leaving under fire barrel, he managed to ignite the second Fokker. The enemy pair stopped attacking and went west. To much grief, Ivashko did not make it to his airfield. He probably lost consciousness from his wound. The pilot crashed near the town of Beresteko. For this battle, for brave actions when covering the commander, I presented Bereskin to the Order of Glory and presented it at the regiment's formation. With Rekkalov, acting commander of the regiment after the wounding of Boris Glinka, had another sharp conversation, demanded not to release small groups. It was clear if a Ivashko subordinate stronger group, he would have chosen a different version of the battle, would have inflicted more damage to the enemy. Our pilots in the air acted bravely, decisively, boldly. Victories, to some even dizzy their heads, led to a violation of the established before the flight plan of combat. So, in particular, happened in the group patrolling northwest of Lvov. Bobrov's 8 was directed from the Corps control centre to a large group of enemy bombers. They flew without fighter escort. The first attack of Bobrov's Link was successful. Down fell several burning Junkers. The rest, dropping bombs, turned around to leave. The excitement of the battle seized and the wing cover. All 8 pounced on the bombers. Our pilots looked through the clouds, appeared from behind the Messerschmitts. Those struck a sudden blow. The plane carried away by the attack Michael Deviatiev caught fire. The pilot turned to the east and went down to the front line, leaving a streak of smoke behind him. "Deviatiev, jump." Misha Jump Bobrov shouted to him. Mikhail heard the command of the leader, but did not jump, pulling to his own. He knew that below, on the ground, the territory occupied by the fascists, and the fire had already reached the cabin. It was burning his face and hands. It was impossible to fly further, and Deviatiev threw himself out of the plane. From the air they saw that the parachute opened at the very ground. The pilot descended directly into the location of Hitler's unit. We learned about the further fate of this brave man later. It turns out that he hit the stabilizer during the jump and opened the parachute in a semi-conscious state. For Mikhail Deviatiev began terrible days of fascist captivity, beatings and hunger. But even there, in the power of mutilators, he found real friends. Patriots began to prepare for escape. But someone, unable to endure torture and hunger, betrayed them for an attempt to escape from the camp shot or mauled by dogs trained for this purpose. There were real Soviet people in the camp. They managed at the risk of themselves to give Deviatiev the documents of the killed servicemen. This saved the pilot from death, but did not save him from further horrors of fascist captivity. Here, for every slightest disobedience of the beastly orders, even for a hateful look, you could get a bullet. The disobedient were beaten to death. Only solidarity between prisoners, firmly defending the dignity of a Soviet man, the help of friends helped Deviatiev to survive. Saved from being shot, he went from one camp to another, and all the time he thought about escape, although there were no favourable conditions for it. Soon Deviatiev found himself in a group of prisoners at an airbase. It was a testing ground for missile weapons on the Baltic Sea, on the island of Usedom. There, an active and cohesive group formed, which developed a plan to seize the plane and escape. Deviatiev was the central figure in the group. He was to drive the fighting machine. It was a daring plan, risky. But the Soviet men knew what they were getting into. Death for them was better than further captivity. Several attempts to capture the bomber failed. Everything almost ended in failure. But endurance and patience of our soldiers were truly boundless. Mikhail Deviatiev understood perfectly well that he took on a difficult task. He did everything to prepare for the escape, used every opportunity to restore his flying skills, to study the new-for-him technique. Removing damaged bombers, the brave pilot studied the location of numerous instruments and toggle switches in the cockpit. And here came the time when it was necessary to take an extreme risk. It was impossible to wait any longer. Combat 10, strictly observing the conspiracy, gathered in a conditional place. Deviatiev carefully instructed everyone. During the lunch break, killing the guard, the prisoners surreptitiously seized a bomber Heinkel 111 with electronic equipment for guiding missiles. Deviatiev with difficulty started the engines on an unfamiliar to him airplane, taxied to the runway. But takeoff was not possible. The depth rudder trimmer was given for landing. Severely exhausted Deviatiev did not have enough strength to give the helm away from himself to lift the tail of the plane. It seemed that everything was over. The airplane stopped at the very edge of the shore. But Deviatiev showed great will, courage and bravery. He took off again, and at the airfield already noticed the fugitives. Hitlerites tried to surround the airplane and capture the brave group. The prisoners had nothing to lose, either to break through and take off, or to perish. In the cockpit of the airplane, were not confused, the pilot was helped to give the helm forward. Heinkel raised the tail on the run-up and, gaining speed, took off. Over the Baltic Sea, the plane took a course to the north. Deviatiev acted coolly. He managed to find a lever to change the position of the depth rudder trimmer and took the load off the airplane control wheel. The brave crew did not lose confidence, and when they tried to attack them, raised on the alert Fokker. They evaded the pursuit by hiding in the clouds. Then the fugitives directed the car to the east, towards our troops. Having exhausted the fuel, Deviatiev landed the Heinkel on the field, already on our side of the front. It was a joyful meeting with Soviet soldiers and officers. The legendary escape was a success. Mikhail Deviatev played an outstanding role in it. The motherland highly appreciated his feat. The pilot was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Of course, the details of the escape became known much later, and much after the war. But seeing that Deviatev landed in the enemy location, we all believed in this pilot, believed that a real fighter, a loyal son of the motherland, will endure all the hardest trials and will not drop his honor. Let me return to the events of that period. One day the headquarters received a message that the repair of 5 airplanes of the 100th Guards Regiment was finished at the airfield near Iasi. We had long ago left this airfield, but the airplanes remained. They were changing the engines. I set the task Lukyanov to transfer their 5 pilots on the airplane Li-2. The transport was going to Moscow, but we agreed that it would fly to Stefanesti. Dmitry Glinka, deputy commander of the regiment, was the senior member of this transfer group. Early in the morning the pilots arrived at the airplane. All on-board benches were already occupied by passengers flying to Moscow. Dmitry Glinka and his group lay down on airplane covers in the tail of the Li-2. The pilots of the transport, unfortunately, were negligent in their flight calculations. The airplane on the route caught the top of the Kremetsky mountain, closed by clouds. All crew members and passengers died. Only our pilots survived. All received severe bruises and wounds. Dmitry Glinka suffered especially. He was unconscious for several days and was treated for 2 months. The pilots were saved by the fact that they were positioned in the tail part of the airplane. Bypassing Lvov from the northwest, the 1st Guards Tank Army and Baranov's cavalry mechanized group entered Poland. Having defeated large nodes of enemy defenses, the units crossed the San River on a wide front and rushed to the Vistula in the direction of Tarnobrzeg and Baranow. Following them, our division relocated to prepared field airfields in the area of Roraruska and Nemyrov. The first of them turned out to be the most difficult for the flying staff. The concave short strip required precise and accurate piloting. But the flight crew did not grumble about it. We knew that here the Russian pilot Pyotr Nesterov took off into the sky. Here he went to the last combat sortie, bravely rammed a German scout. Pyotr Nesterov knew that he was taking a mortal risk for the sake of his fatherland. The name of the glorious son of the fatherland is well known to all our aviators. He wrote a bright, unforgettable page in the history of not only Russian, but also world aviation, was the founder of aerobatics. This pilot was a talented, highly educated and technically competent specialist. He calculated and was the first in the world to perform a dead loop, the first to ram an enemy airplane. Peter Nesterov was for us, pilots, the embodiment of bravery and boundless patriotism. The pilots of the connection, flying to intercept the fascist aviation from the airfields of Rava-Ruskaya and Nemyrov, continued the glorious combat traditions of the first Russian aviators. An excellent air battle was held in those days, a group of 3 squadrons under the command of the regiment commander P. Kryukov. Covering the ground troops, it was directed from the forward control to a group of 9 bombers Heinkel 111, transferred to the Eastern Front from the west. Later, from a survey of captured pilots, it became known that, having heard Goebbels' propaganda about the incomparable qualities of Nazi aces, the bombers confidently went out to bomb our positions without cover fighter escort, successfully bombed England and ships on the sea communications. Hubristic Hitler's aces were full of disdain for our pilots. 8 Kryukov and 4 Bobrov boldly went to a tightly flying group of Heinkels. From the first attacks were shot down several bombers, including the leading one. Having dropped bombs in panic into the woods, the Heinkels turned to the west. Our group did not weaken the onslaught. On the ground burned already several fallen bombers. 3 hit Heinkel with difficulty landed in the meadows in the location of our advancing troops. In this battle Kryukov shot down 3 bombers, Bobrov 2, and the rest were shot down by pilots of their group. Hitler's aces ended their career by joining the ranks of prisoners. Going on a mission or returning from it, it was nice to see on the ground, over the area of this battle, burned Heinkels and 3 hit, lying like whale carcasses, bombers. The division command was very worried about the further basing of regiments and squadrons. We were afraid to fall behind the troops. We asked to allocate for our regiments new airfields to the west, but there was no answer. Soon, however, General Samokin, the deputy head of the Air Force Academy, who was undergoing training for the commander of the Air Army and supervising the combat operations of the northern grouping of the front's aviation, flew to our airfield near Rava-Ruskaya. Having heard my report on the combat activity of the division and its condition, as well as a request for airfields, Samokin ordered. Your division is scheduled airfields in the area of Stala Volya. Immediately send there on U2 your deputy for reconnaissance, and in the coming days relocate. Yes, but the enemy hasn't been knocked out of this area yet. That can't be. Execute the order. General Samokin, without saying goodbye, flew away. The next day he returned with Krasovsky. I met them on the airfield at the plain, briefly reported on the state of affairs. Pokrishkin, you have no order, with a Belarusian accent began the conversation Krasovsky. That in the division disrupts the fulfillment of combat missions because of bad aviation oil, then do not follow the instructions of my trainee deputy. Comrade Commander. Sent oil with sand, and already 2 planes sat down forced in the field, the engines jammed. The pilots are not confident in the reliability of the equipment, and this affects their condition in combat missions. If you don't believe me, let's listen to the engineer. All right. Call. Already more calmly said Krasovsky. And send U2 in the area of Stala Volya cannot, Comrade Commander. The mobile group of the front has forced the SAM much further south and is moving to Tarnobrzeg. To the north, between the Vistula and the San, there are German defences. Today a couple of our fighters were scouting there, and 1 plane was hit by an anti-aircraft gun. He managed to reach his own and landed involuntarily. I explained my opinion about the airfields. We are talking, and we are watching the taking off 6 going on a combat mission. Suddenly, in the last pair at the end of the run-up, wingman abnormally knocked motor, then cut off. The airplane by inertia continued to roll. It bounced off the shaft at the end of the runway, soared like a springboard, 20 meters. Pilot Rudenko vigorously grabbed the handle. The plane made a full corkscrew barrel roll and slammed wheels on the ground, breaking the landing gear. What is this? Comrade Commander. General Samokin lamented. I think that the cause of the engine stoppage is due to defective oil. The pilot is alive. There he came out of the cockpit. I calmed Samokin. Krasovsky found out how many such cases occurred, asked what measures we are taking to filter the oil, although he realized that in the field will not achieve its quality cleaning. But we have to fulfill combat tasks. It's clear. Wait for the oil tomorrow morning, and airfields for relocation of your division I appoint in the area south of Loyuban indicated on the map. Krasovsky, and, having said goodbye, went to his transport plane. Before evening on U2 flew out to inspect the new field airfields. Soon saw 2 9P2 bombers returning from a mission. The group tried to attack the 4 Focke-Wulf 190. Yaks, accompanying the bombers, skillfully repelled the enemy's attacks. In an effort not to be detected by the Fokkers, pressed against the tops of trees, but slipped through unnoticed, could not. Fokkers found my plane. Having made sure that they could not reach the bombers, they circled over me. I realized that Hitlerites decided to get at least a training plane, U2. The situation was unpleasant. There was nowhere to land. All around there was a forest with clearings and small meadows. Landing would surely end with a full cowl, heavy injuries. The only thing left was to spin around to get away under enemy fire, using the clearings in the forest. That's what I did. I made a slide and threw the plane from one clearing to another, making it difficult to aim fire. Fokkers, without success, turned around and went west. Mentally berating myself for flying an unarmed airplane, I went out to Fox Pits and landed on the site intended for the regiment's basing. The airfield was a narrow strip of meadow between 2 rivulets. Fighters could take off and land only in one direction. But there was no time to look for other, more convenient sites. We could fall behind the advancing troops. It was necessary to move the division forward, to the west. Knowing the pilots of the regiments, I was sure that they would master this improvised airfield. The second point for basing required a lot of time to level the runway. At a meeting with the deputies, we decided to relocate the division headquarters and 2 fighter regiments for the time being. In the evening, the airfield construction platoon, advanced teams of the airfield battalion, division and regimental headquarters left for Lysy. After their departure, Major Leonid Andreevich Volobiev, head of the Special Division Department, came to see me. "Comrade Commander, do you know who you live in the apartment?" "The headmaster of the local school." "Why?" "That's right, the principal. But he is also the head of the Banderite underground of the whole district," Volobiev said. I could sense confidence in his voice, but I couldn't help myself. "It can't be. Such an intelligent and polite man. He meets me in the middle of the night and escorts me to my room." Honest intellectuals, who did not support Ukrainian bourgeois nationalists, were almost all killed by fascists and onovci during the years of occupation. Now, in intellectual positions mostly sit members of the AUN, agents and henchmen of the German fascists. They have disguised themselves. At meetings they politely say Mr. Captain Mr. Major and carry a pistol or a lance behind their backs. You have to be extremely careful and vigilant with them. We had a long conversation. Volobiev told me about the essence of Ukrainian bourgeois nationalism and the Uniate Church. All the activities of these detractors of the Ukrainian people were aimed at fighting against the Soviet state, against their own people. They poisoned the people of Western Ukraine with the poison of nationalism and anti-communism. Crawling away after the fleeing fascist army, the onovci left a reactionary underground on the liberated land to harm and kill our soldiers and citizens who enthusiastically greeted our victorious troops and the Soviet power. An example of their meanness was the fatal wounding of the talented commander NFF Vatutin. "You, Comrade Commander, can no longer live in your old apartment. Should spend the night at headquarters," advised Leonid Andreevich at the end of our conversation. The next day I decided to personally talk to the arrested school principal. He confirmed everything that Major Volobiev had reported to me and asked. I admitted my guilt, and in my defense I named about 70 active nationalists secretly left in our district. 06, I ask you not to tell anyone about this, otherwise my whole family will be slaughtered by the Banderites. And why didn't you organize the attack during the period when I slept in your house? I hoped that having a military chief staying with me would avert the suspicion of the Chekists. This unpleasant conversation forced me to take additional measures to ensure the safety of the division's personnel. The issue was of no small importance, and I, as a commander responsible for the fate of subordinate officers and soldiers, had to pay increased attention to it. Soon the ground situation became more complicated. Before the aviation division faced new combat tasks, it was caused by the fact that the 1st Guards Tank Army, which we covered from the air, after forcing the San began a stealthy advance to the Vistula. It was tasked with a rapid rush of advanced units to force the powerful river in the area of Tarnobrzeg and Baranow, seize bridgeheads, and ensure the success of the future offensive of the front. Covering the tank brigades was complicated by the fact that we were more than 100 kilometers behind. We had to spend almost half an hour to fly to the Vistula and back. This created additional difficulties for the flying staff, because we had to be in the air from early morning until late evening. The division did not have enough forces to operate in large groups. We had to send out patrols consisting of 6, rarely 8 airplanes. The results of battles of such small groups with superior enemy forces were not satisfactory. To create air superiority required the immediate relocation of regiments west of Sana A. Once Chief of Staff Abramovich came to me with a map. I could see from his face that the news was good. They reported on the readiness of field airfields to receive airplanes, he reported. By evening all regiments flew to new points. With the last group I went into the air. After a while I landed. It was a difficult landing. Between the parking places of planes only 20-30 meters. So much for the fox pits, I thought. I looked around the airfield. The rivulets did not allow to carry aside the aircraft parking lots. The width of the runway is extremely small. It's difficult to take off and land. But there are also many advantages. We came closer to the Vistula, and now we can release strong groups of fighters on patrol to gain air supremacy in this area. And this is important. The tank army was going to force the Vistula. I instructed the pilots in case of damage to the airplanes in the battle to land only with retracted landing gear on a marshy meadow located behind the river. In the following days, the combat work of the division became more cheerful. They flew in groups of up to 12 or more airplanes. The pilots, feeling the strength behind them, more boldly and effectively attacked the enemy bombers and fighters, trying to delay the Soviet tank formations to the Vistula. Especially the young people acted with excitement in the air. In one of the battles, our 8 was pointed by the forward command center at a dozen Fokkers. They went to storm the column of vehicles of the tank army. In the first decisive attack were shot down 3 Fokkers. The rest, having dropped untargeted bombs, tried to escape. Viktor Nikitin, pursuing the Fokker going up, caught up with him and shot him at point-blank range. The attack was so rapid that he hit the enemy plane with the propeller. The enemy went to the ground with a severed tail. Nikitin from the collision with the Fokker broke through the lantern and was on the fuselage, and the fighter was falling down. By a great effort of will, the brave pilot still managed to rush down and open the parachute. On this day, the young pilot Rudenko distinguished himself. In the battle with a mixed group of the enemy, he acted as a true master of air combat, shot down a U-87 bomber and a Focke-Wulf 190. Reinforced groups of fighters acted, as a rule, tactically competent, boldly attacked the air enemy, disrupted bombing and assault strikes, destroyed enemy aircraft, and our losses were sharply reduced. On the first day, flying from Lysia Pits on patrol, the 8 under the general command of Andrei Trud met a large group of bombers. They were covered by fighters. Andrei Trud's 4 attacked the bombers, and Viktor Zadev's 4 tied up the Fokkers in combat. Bombers, having dropped a load in the field, tried to leave to the west, and Fokkers, unable to withstand the pressure, left the battle, abandoned their charges. Our group shot down 5 U-87s that day. A little later at the command post, I received some more pleasant messages. A group of 9 airplanes under the command of Ivan Barbach, flying out of Smolintsy airfield in the morning, met 8 Fokkers. Apparently they were going on an attack. They were covered by 4 Messerschmitt, followed by a swift attack of Babak's group, and 3 Fokker burning crashed into the ground. 4 Bondarenko, who was in the air at the same period, struck another group of Messerschmitts. From the first attack, 2 Mi-109s caught fire, from the second another one. The rest of the enemy planes, forcing the engines, went west. In this battle 6 enemy fighters were shot down, and an assault on our tank column was thwarted. It became obvious that the relocation to Lysia Yemi improved conditions for covering the advancing troops. But the situation on the ground, in the basing area, we were not happy. On the second night, the airfield was shelled by the Banderovites. They were firing from behind a rivulet. The technical staff was raised on alert, combed the forest. From early morning without rest, technicians and mechanics had to service combat sorties. In the future, this was not allowed. In order to protect the equipment and people, to give the technicians an opportunity to repair the damaged planes in peace, and to provide at least a short sleep, at night they began to install several airplanes with their noses towards the forest. They raised their tails to ensure firing from the parking lot. Technicians or gunners were on duty in the cockpits of fighter planes. When at least one shot rang out from the forest, they quickly started their engines and gave powerful cues. It worked. Soon it became calmer, the shelling stopped. I remember once at 1 o'clock in the morning, having finished planning the upcoming combat day in the headquarters, having signed award materials and submissions for ranks to the personnel, I went to the apartment allocated to me and Goregliad. It was located in a neighbouring building. I just fell asleep, as the phone call tore me out of bed. "Hello. What's the matter?" "Comrade Commander, the neighbouring village is on fire." Heard the alarmed voice of the duty officer. I threw aside the blanket masking the window. I see burning houses on the outskirts of the village. It was 500 meters away from us. Machine gun bursts began to sound there. Immediately we sent there a communications platoon of the division headquarters. Soon the shooting stopped. In the morning with Abramovich and Voloboyev drove up to the village. Among the charred and still smoking logs lay dead and burned old men, women and children. By the barns lay the corpses of cows and horses. It was hard to look at this atrocity committed by vile bastards. We approached a group of residents. Who did it? We don't know. We were asleep. And then the shooting started and the houses caught fire. We don't know anything, the peasants reluctantly answered, but averted their frightened eyes. We didn't find out anything. We approached a small brick house, a school. At the door stood a middle-aged man, dressed in golf pants, next to a woman in her 30s. Who are you? I asked. Who shot from the roof of your school? We are teachers sent here to teach children, and this is the case. We decided to leave for Lubakso. Volobiev checked our papers. Everything's in order, but as soon as the couple moved half a kilometre away from the village, a young man of about 15 jumped out of the bushes. Pointing at the teachers, he spoke excitedly with a Polish accent. Mr. Colonel. Mr. Colonel, arrest them. This is a Bandera emissary. I know him. He came from Rawaruska to carry out an operation to exterminate Poles. Arrest him. One of the workers of the special department and my adjutant followed me. They arrested suspicious people. Volobiev and his employee started the investigation, and I left for the command post. Returned to the division headquarters late in the evening. Volobiev reported to me the results of the investigation of this atrocious tragedy in the village. The Polish boy was right. The local kulaks, having seized land from Polish peasants during the fascist occupation, were afraid that it would have to be returned to its real owners. They carried out, under the guidance of a teacher, a Banderovite who came from Rawaruska, an action of brutal extermination of the Poles. Their thirst for enrichment and nationalist hatred pushed them to a monstrous crime. Having listened to Volobiev's report, I asked him, I don't see our hosts at home. What's wrong with them? We moved them to another house. By chance, we learned from neighbours that the Banderovites forced them to kill you and Gorigliad, threatened to kill them. What? Such simple people could commit a crime. The Onovites forced the peasants to take any step. Fear is the main weapon of the nationalists now. And he told me that recently a deacon of a church in a neighbouring village, a member of the Ukrainian nationalist organisation, was arrested. He did not deny it, named several active Banderovites, and pointed out a base in the forest. In this underground storage were found a complete set of telephones, switchboard of the city of Lubashuva, barrels of salted lard, many other products, as well as weapons and ammunition. During the interrogations, the deacon asked nobody to tell that he had pointed out the Banderites and their storehouse, otherwise the whole family would be slaughtered, small children would not be spared. It is necessary for the political department and your special department to strengthen the education of vigilance and caution among the personnel, as well as to intensify the work with the local population, I advised. In the last days of July and the first days of August, the intensity of combat work has increased even more. Having penetrated deep into the enemy's defences, the forward units of the 1st Guards Tank Army forced the Vistula and fought hard to expand the bridgehead on the western bank. The Nazi command, realising the importance of the captured bridgehead for future operations, feverishly transferred reserves to this area. Here and arrived about 10 divisions from the Western Front, where the Anglo-American armies were still trampled in northern France. Hovering north of the tank army, groups of the enemy immediately launched powerful counterattacks along the eastern bank of the Vistula from Tarnobzeg and from the south from Melek. The enemy sought to cut off the troops on the bridgehead. Hitler's command concentrated here its 4th Air Fleet. The main forces of the front, having finished the destruction of the encircled Lvov group of the enemy and having liberated Lvov on July 27th, were more than 100 kilometres away from the Vistula. The main aviation formations of the left wing of the front still remained on the former airfields, mastered during the beginning of the Lviv-Sandomiersk operation. They were about 200 kilometres from the forward positions. The entire load of covering the crossings and bridgehead troops, reflecting counterattacks, fell on the 6th Guards Fighter Corps. But it was not easy for our regiments. Combat work was complicated by the distance of airfields from the advanced tank formations that broke through to the Vistula. We also lagged behind them by more than 100 kilometers. That's why we had to send small groups of 6 or 8 airplanes to cover the troops. In this difficult situation, the advanced control center of the division was deployed near the Vistula, just east of the river, to better ensure the control of fighters over the crossing and bridgehead. However, we found ourselves on the spearhead of enemy counterattacks. I had to be at the command post all these days and manage the actions of the fighters. In one of the nights near the command post, tanks were dispersed and camouflaged. In the morning, the brigade commander came to us. Sticking out of the hatch, shouted, "Aviators, you'd better get out of here. There's an enemy tank group coming. It's going to be a hot fight." I went out to him. "We can't leave. We've got to control the fighters. Can't you guys hold off the enemy? Let's give him a light. But you might get shot at." "It's all right. We'll help you." "Unfortunately, our guns can't penetrate tank armor. We'll storm the vehicles." "That's not bad. Beat the infantry, and we'll deal with the tanks ourselves." The sun came up. From the south we heard a growing noise. Soon the enemy's dense fighting order appeared. Tanks came closer and closer. The calculation of the control room got worried. "What are our tankers? Why do not shoot?" "They are doing the right thing. We must let them come as close as possible and hit for sure," tried to calm the calculation of the control room. I can't hide, I was uneasy myself. Everyone took the defense, prepared grenades. And the enemy tanks, not expecting an ambush, moved confidently. They did not find camouflaged positions of our tankers. That's where the stamina showed. Sudden fire from close range was accurate. The front armored vehicles of the enemy flashed. Following them, opening fire, began to turn around in combat order. However, our tankers maneuvered, went to the reserve positions. Enemy shells covered the empty places. Several armor-piercing bolts with a whistle crashed into the ground near the control. A new enemy attack followed. Our T-34s set fire to several more tanks at point-blank range, and pursuing the retreating enemy, inflicted him sensitive losses. On the road and on the field, about 30 enemy tanks were burning and standing hit. Our KP calculation, watching the battle, did not weaken attention to the air situation. Here was a change of patrolling fighters. I immediately contacted the team of the departing group. "Trofimov, I'm Tiger. South of the city, armored personnel carriers with enemy infantry. Storm them. I see burning tanks and cars on the roads and in the field. Let's attack." Nikolai immediately responded. Trofimov's group acted bravely and accurately. It set fire to several armored personnel carriers and vehicles, defeated the enemy infantry. This day the enemy did not make more attacks, but soon, having pulled up additional forces, he again began counterattacks from the south. At this time, the 3rd Guards Tank Army Rybolko was transferred to the Vistula. It dealt a powerful blow to the enemy grouping. Having suffered heavy losses, Hitler's units hastily retreated to Melek and Vistula. By August 10th, the main forces of the front came to the Vistula and began fighting for the expansion of the bridgehead. The main compounds of the Air Army also pulled up to the area and joined the fighting. For our division, the situation improved dramatically. Il-2 regiments of the Ryazanov Corps began assault operations, and our division completely moved to cover the crossings and bridgehead from the Nazi air raids. Leaving for myself at the CP of the Chief of Air and Gunnery Training of the division, hero of the Soviet Union Vishnevetsky, I flew on PO2 to Lysy-Yamy. And unexpectedly I got to the funeral of the division navigator, hero of the Soviet Union Vasily Shanko. The circumstances of his death were offensive. General Samokin, the trainee of the commander of the Air Army, who arrived at the division headquarters, ordered Shanko to fly on PO2 with an officer of the Airfield Construction Service to the area of Staliva Volya and to determine there the condition of the concrete airfield for basing fighters. On the approach to Staliva Volya, the PO2 found itself over the leading edge of the German defences. The airplane was shelled by anti-aircraft fire and caught fire. Turning the burning machine to the south, Shanko pulled to the positions of our troops. but could not withstand the flames, jumped out of the cockpit at a height of 30 meters, and from the impact with the ground crashed. Ho-2, with killed still in the air officer of the airfield service, fell on the neutral strip. Our infantrymen jumped out of the front trenches and under machine gun fire dragged Shchenko into the trench. This incident shocked the entire flying staff of the division. The pilots have always had great respect for Shchenko, a brave air fighter, a good comrade. As a capable commander, I took him assistant for navigational training in the battles on the Prut. His death was a heavy loss. Soon the Airfield Construction Service found suitable field sites closer to the Vistula and prepared them for basing airplanes. 2 regiments landed in Jezo, and the 26th Guards Air Regiment, which included my combat airplane, landed in Mokrzyso, a suburb of Tarnobrzeg. The headquarters of the division was located there. Favourable conditions of basing allowed to solve more successfully the tasks of covering the troops engaged in intense battles to expand the bridgehead behind the Vistula. The hot days of mid-August 1944. The front, having destroyed the enemy group encircled on the bridgehead, successfully completed the Lviv-Sandomiersk operation. Preparation for new battles began. Plans for the upcoming operation were being developed, troops were being manned and trained, fuel, ammunition and food stocks were being created. These days were remarkable in my life. On the night of August 19th, the telephone rang. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the receiver. If they call so late, it means a message about some unpleasant incident. The duty officer of the headquarters spoke. Comrade Commander of the division, congratulations on the awarding you the title of thrice hero of the Soviet Union. And he read out a congratulatory telegram from General Krasovsky. It informed me that I had been awarded this high rank for the 3rd time, the first in the Soviet army. For some time I was silent. I couldn't even believe that our party and government appreciated my military deeds so highly. The first 3 times hero. All this somehow did not fit in my consciousness. 3 years of fights, victories and failures, successes and disappointments flashed in my memory. Of course I understood that this award was the result of the labour of all my subordinates and combat friends. In this award courage, and those who burned in the sky, died a brave death for the freedom and honour of the fatherland. The valour and feat of all my fellow soldiers is in this highest award of the motherland. In the morning there were congratulations of friends and comrades, calls from the headquarters of the Air Army and the front, a telegram from the commander of the Air Force AA, Novikov. To this day I still remember warm and heartfelt words of pilots and technicians, my combat comrades in arms. I had to go through the years of war side by side with them, to fight together. My joy was shared by my mentors and pupils in hard fights with the enemy, from whom I learned and taught myself to fight, saved me in difficult moments, and they covered me from enemy attacks, prepared the airplane for the battle. For successes in the Lviv-Sandomiersk operation, many pilots and technicians of the division were awarded orders and medals. Arkady Fedorov and Andrei Trud were added to the Pleiad of heroes. Unfortunately, the joyful days in the division were overshadowed by the tragic death of the squadron navigator hero of the Soviet Union Mikhail Lykovid, aircraft technician Krasnyansky, and mechanic Fonkovich. In one of the battles with Fukas, a young pilot broke away from the group. Taking a course to his airfield, he missed it and landed on the remnants of fuel on a marshy meadow near the village of Maidan, not far from Rava-Roskaya. Upon reaching the nearest town, the pilot reported the location of the forced landing and the nature of the breakdown. Lykovid's group was sent there to repair and ferry the airplane. Several days passed, and there was no news from Lykovid. Knowing that the Arnovci were operating in our rear, I ordered to send a group of machine gunners to the place of forced landing. They returned 2 days later and reported the terrible circumstances of the death of our soldiers. The airplane was repaired quickly, but the runway did not provide lift. Peasants from the local village were already finishing the work when Lykovid's group was attacked by a band of Bandera fighters. The technician and mechanic took the fight, and Lykovid started the engine. However, the takeoff was not successful. The unfinished runway was short. The airplane, having hit a boggy meadow on the run, got stuck. The Banderites surrounded the fighter, opened fire. Lykovid shot back from the bandits, but was seriously wounded. Banderovites pulled him out of the cockpit, threw him next to the wounded technician, poured gasoline on him. The mutilators burned the soldiers alive. Only the fate of the mechanic remained unknown. Ukrainian Lykovid and Russian Krasnyansky fought for the liberation of Ukraine from fascist invaders and died on its land at the hands of traitors, bourgeois nationalists. The nurturers of the Uniate Church and fascism acted according to Hitler's models. We were convinced of this when we visited the death camp Majdanek. Taking advantage of the lull in the fighting, pilots and technicians travelled in groups to this terrible place, where fascists were brutalized, torturing people from the USSR and occupied countries of Europe. The death camp was located near the Polish city of Lublin. Barracks, kazamas, low buildings, baths, surrounded by wire fences with guard towers, were the last refuge of several million people. Here the fascists housed hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war, condemning them to starvation and torture, to martyrdom. Old people, women and children, even infants, were brought to the camp. They were taken to the bathhouse, having taken away their clothes and cut off the hair of women and children. They were transported under the guise of disinfection to the gas block, where the doors were hermetically sealed and the gas was started. The deceived people died in agony. Teams of prisoners of war loaded the corpses of the poisoned onto cars and then burned them. The chimneys of the crematorium smoked continuously, day and night. The ashes of the burned were taken to Nazi Germany to fertilize the fields. In Majdanek we were shown large barracks warehouses. There were millions of pairs of shoes, from small children's shoes to 45th size boots. Another barracks held hundreds of bags of hair. The guards had not had time to send them off to make wigs, sleeping mattresses and upholstered furniture. These terrible minutes of being in the former fascist death factory will never be forgotten. Each of us felt that we were in the underworld. All without a trace of hatred, rage to those who invented and created these atrocities. Many days after visiting the Nazi death camp, we were haunted by heavy memories. Hatred called us to fight, made us braver to beat the enemy. Even the joyful news about such events as the division being named Sandomierskaya and awarded the order of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, as well as the name Lvovsky. To our 6th Guards Air Corps was overshadowed by all the horrors that we had seen in Majdanek. In early October, I, Rechkalov, Fedorov and Labour were summoned to Moscow. Gold stars of heroes of the Soviet Union were handed over by Nikolai Mikhailovich Shvernik in the Kremlin. Then we were invited to the headquarters of the Air Force. The group was received by the commander of the Air Force A. Novikov. He warmly congratulated us on our awards. Turning to me, he said, "Alexander Ivanovich, your fellow countryman called and asked to let you go to Novosibirsk for a few days. Would you like to fly to your native Siberia?" "Of course, Comrade Air Chief Marshal. I haven't been there for more than 8 years. I want to see my mother and wife." "Good. Fly out early tomorrow morning. And joked, just be careful with your fellow countrymen, so they don't drag you away. I know what Siberian hospitality is." Even before dawn, the airplane headed east. Journalists and movie workers flew with me in Li-2. On the eve of the flight and in the air, there were questions about my childhood, about my work as a roofer in Sibir and as a fitter and moulder at the Sibselmash plant, about the battles. We were distracted only when the mountains of the Urals appeared under us, and then Sverdlovsk, covered with the smoke of factory chimneys. Immediately after landing, we were taken to a meeting with the workers of Uralmash. A meeting and a visit to a huge workshop where heavy tanks for the front were made a short sleep, and again a flight. Beneath us stretched the vast expanses of Siberia. The Obi River appeared ahead. How many times in my childhood I swam across it on a dare with the guys. Here was my native Novosibirsk. Here, as a 12-year-old boy, I first saw an agitation plane. Among all the residents of the city who fled to the field of the military camp and surrounded the airplane, I stood there with my mouth hanging open in amazement, looking at the miracle of technology. I touched its wings and mentally said to myself, I will do everything, but I will become only a pilot. I remember at the rally, pilots agitated the people to create the Soviet air fleet. At that time I, a schoolboy, did not have a penny to build airplanes. But I was destined by fate to make my personal contribution to the development of Soviet military aviation. Through the airplane porthole, I tried to see the city of my childhood and youth. I remembered the hard time of my youth. After all, I had to be unemployed, to be registered at the labour exchange. In those years, I and my peers dreamed of becoming workers of the railway depot of a small factory trud, which had 2 shafts, or to work at the soap factory. These were the only enterprises in the city. In the first 5-year plan, factories began to be built. The labour exchange was closed. We built these factories ourselves and started working at them ourselves. For us young guys, there was a lot of freedom in choosing a profession. Now, more than 10 years later, I did not recognize the city. Residential neighborhoods, large factories spread out on both sides of the Obi and stretched to the taiga and the steppe. A joyful feeling swept over me. Here it is, one of the forges of our victory over German fascism. On landing, I saw a large gathering of people. People filled almost half of the airfield. At once I recognized my mother, Maria, and relatives. It turns out that it was my fellow countrymen from Novosibirsk who welcomed me so solemnly. Hugs and kisses. A short meeting. Then, through a corridor of standing people on Red Avenue, we came to my mother's house. But in the circle of family and loved ones, I was only before going to sleep. All the days that were given to me during my stay in Novosibirsk were filled with meetings with workers at the factories. I performed in huge workshops, and everywhere in the bulk of workers, women and teenagers. Replacing husbands and fathers who went to the front, they stood at fire-breathing furnaces, machined shells and mines, built airplanes. The nationwide participation in the defeat of the fascist invaders was clearly confirmed. Preparing an attack on our motherland, Hitler and his fascist hordes did not take into account the inexhaustible patriotism of the Soviet people, and for this they cruelly paid the price. The days of the short vacation passed quickly. Here is the last meeting with the citizens of Novosibirsk on the city square. It took place late in the evening, with searchlights. We are going to the airfield. Sad farewell to relatives and friends. The plane, having taken off in the darkness of the autumn night, took a course to Moscow. But thoughts about my mother and wife did not leave me until the landing. In Moscow, at the central aerodrome, we were solemnly handed over a squadron of La-7 airplanes, presented by the Komsomol members of Novosibirsk at the expense of deductions from salaries and donations. Without delaying in the capital, a small group flew to the front. The pilots of the regiment headed by Kryukov greeted us with joy. He was appointed my deputy instead of Gorigliad, who left to command one of the divisions of our corps. I briefly told my friends about the events I had experienced and the journey to Siberia. Immediately, business called imperiously. It was necessary to start retraining of pilots of the 16th Guards Sandomir Aviation Regiment on La-7 to prepare for the offensive operation of the front. The airfield in the Stalo-Volia area, where pilots were being retrained on the La-7 airplane, was unlucky for us. Earlier, when scouting it, Vasily Shanko had been killed. And now, in a training flight, a remarkable combat pilot hero of the Soviet Union, Alexander Klubov, crashed. The fault was not only the failure of the equipment, but also irresponsibility of the regiment commander in the organization of training flights that day. Poorly repaired concrete strip, blown up by Hitlerites during the retreat, very strong side wind did not guarantee safety of landings and takeoffs, even on serviceable airplanes. It was unwise to conduct flights in such conditions. But the regiment commander did not take this into account, showed carelessness. Failure of landing boards on Klubov's airplane, strong lateral drift led to the lengthening of the runway. At the end of the runway, landing gear wheels hit the soft ground. There was a full cowl of the airplane and disaster. Alexander Klubov could not be saved. He died in a Polish hospital an hour and a half later. The death in training flights Ivan Olefrenko before the battles on the Prut, and now Klubov. It was hard to speak at the funeral rally in front of Klubov's coffin. My throat was in spasms. Sasha Klubov was a real battle friend for me. We had fought more than one battle with him, starting from Kuban. After Vadim Fadiev, he was the dearest person for me. We didn't have an orchestra. We saw Sasha off on his last journey under the salute from cannons and machine guns, under the rumble of fighter squadrons passing over us. Alexander Klubov was buried in Lvov, on the Hill of Glory. He did not live just a few days before he was awarded the title of twice Hero of the Soviet Union, but in Lvov it was not possible to spend a friend. The operational and tactical training camp of the Corps command staff began. Theoretical classes at the training camp gave a lot, allowed us to get a deeper understanding of the operational art. More difficult for me, who had no academic training, was playing on the map of the upcoming actions in the offensive. In this, great help was provided by a well-trained and experienced officer chief of staff of our Division B, A. Abramovich. Abramovich. Together we mastered this section of the training camp program. Good marks for the decision crowned a great work. In these days came a telegram from Novosibirsk. Maria was especially pleased with the message about the birth of her daughter. True, there was a reason for jokes. Pilots of my combat group once at a meeting reproached, "Comrade Commander, how did it happen? During your stay in Novosibirsk, in the newspaper was a picture with his wife. It was said about the imminent birth of a son. And a daughter was born." Viktor Zerdev teased me. But I could see that he was really happy for me. "That's right. It is necessary to have a nanny for the next sons," I joked. After the Corps training camp began in the Air Army. They were led by Stepan Akimovich Krasovsky. The training camp was attended by the commander of the front, Marshal of the Soviet Union Ivan Stepanovich Konov. Such attention to the preparation of the future operation, to the training of the command staff, was not accidental. The commander well understood the importance of aviation in the successful solution of problems, loved aviators, supported initiative and strong-willed commanders. At the end of the training camp was checked personal readiness of the command staff. Commanders of bomber formations bombed targets on the range, and assault shot small targets. Especially distinguished at the range talented commander of the Bomber Corps, General I.S. Polbin. He from the first approach on the P-2 from a deep dive accurately hit the target. Commanders of fighter divisions were required to light 2 barrels of soot doused with gasoline. They were camouflaged in a low forest. Hitting a small target was not easy. My turn was at the end of the shooters. Before the flight I knew that the target barrels had not yet been shot. The actions of commanders at the range watched all the leadership of the front and the Air Army. It was inconvenient to screw up. I put into this sortie all the skill, all the experience of destroying small-sized targets, accumulated in the past combat sorties, when attacking the enemy. I understood that I was defending not only my honor, it was about the prestige of a fighter pilot. And here I was flying in a strafing flight over the treetops of the grove on the range, where the targets should be. I hardly find them in a small clearing. Camouflaged by branches under the huts, they were not conspicuous. The targets are spotted. With a shave I make a vertical slide, put the plane on its back, steeply dive in an inverted position in a preempted point and turn the plane to a normal position. At low altitude I change the dive profile from high angle to low angle, accurately aim at the target and open fire. The barrel explodes and the camouflage hut of branches bursts into flames. I leave over the treetops and repeat the maneuver to approach the second hut. A line and it is engulfed in flames. On a shaving flight I go to the airfield. In the evening in the dormitory from the participants of the training camp sprinkled rave reviews of the method of assault. There is nothing to be surprised about, I answer. These are skills acquired in combat sorties. I was especially pleased with the praise of General is Polbin. The commander of the Bomber Aircraft Corps often personally leads groups to bomb the enemy. He was considered an unsurpassed master of bombing strikes from dive on the P-2 airplane. His assessment was something to be proud of. By the new year, the preparation of the division for the fulfillment of combat tasks was completed. The offensive was expected in the second half of January. Suddenly, right after the New Year's holiday, we received a command to secretly relocate to the bridgehead, to the airfield Skotniki. Here the headquarters of the division was relocated. Immediately we went to the front line. We had to see the future defense breakthrough strip. Here, in the forest, the 3rd Guards Tank Army was concentrating. I was already aware of the fact that Rybolko asked Krasovsky to assign our division to his tank army, to cover the Guards, tankers and honor for our division. It was necessary to justify the trust given. To do this, it was necessary to carefully work out the interaction with the tank army for the entire depth of the operation. 3 days were spent in travelling along the roads on the bridgehead, where on sagebrush, where on log decks, all broken by tanks. The tracks are wide. The frost caught the mud quickly. Such trips made my insides ache in the evening. But at least we managed to coordinate all the issues, to get acquainted with the commanders of formations. We were waiting for the order to attack.